Chapter 1. Ethan Westwood was back the moment Clara Miller heard the news. She shot up in bed and immediately ran downstairs toward the Westwood family manor. Uncle Ethan, the manor was unusually quiet. A servant gestured awkwardly toward the study, and Clara understood. Wiping the excitement from her face, she tiptoed up the stairs. From the study door, she could hear the furious voice of Elias Westwood. "You abandoned a perfectly good corporation to run off and join the army for 4 years, Ethan Westwood. Are you trying to be the death of me? Since you're so full of your own ideas, why did you even bother coming back? Don't think that a few whacks with my cane means this is all forgotten." Hearing that her Uncle Ethan had been hit, Clara couldn't stop herself from pushing the door open. She saw the tall man rising from a kneeling position, his long legs straightening. His eyes were even colder and steadier than they had been 4 years ago. Seeing Clara enter, old Master Westwood looked a little embarrassed. He could discipline his grandson however he liked, but Ethan was still technically Clara's elder. It wasn't proper for her to witness it. At the door, the girl spoke timidly, "Great-grandpa, I came to see Uncle Ethan." Ethan remained calm. Elias shot him a glare, then turned to Clara with a smile. "Of course," he said, and walked out, leaning on his cane. Now only the two of them were left in the study. Clara looked at the man she hadn't seen in 4 years, and her eyes couldn't help but well up. The Millers and the Westwoods were old family friends, their ties going back decades. Ethan was 8 years her senior, a self-possessed and cool-headed man. The younger generation was all afraid of him, respectfully calling him Uncle Ethan whenever they saw him. Only she was never afraid. Not only was she not afraid, but she had also loved to cling to him since she was a child. And he had doted on her the most. He had taught the girls who bullied her a lesson and chased away the boys who pursued her. When she was little, she didn't get along with the other children in the neighborhood and would often be sad. He would hold her in his arms and soothe her. There, don't cry. Uncle Ethan will always be with you." 4 years ago, she heard that he had given up the vast family business to become a special forces soldier, fulfilling a childhood dream. Clara had waited day and night for his return, and now, finally, he was back. Ethan ruffled her hair, his tone carrying a familiar mix of helplessness and affection. "What are you crying for?" With red-rimmed eyes, Clara threw herself into his arms, wrapping her hands tightly around him. Her voice was unconsciously coquettish. "Uncle Ethan, I missed you so much. You're finally back. Look, Clara's all grown up now." She was only 18 when Ethan left. Now she had already graduated from college. She had missed him terribly and hugged him with all her might. But the man before her didn't hug her back and comfort her as he used to. Instead, his body stiffened, and then, with an undeniable force, he pushed her away. His breathing was slightly uneven. "You're so old now, why are you still so clingy?" Clara froze. Didn't he used to love it when she acted this way? Just as she was about to speak, his phone rang. When he saw the name on the screen, his perpetually cool gaze lit up, and he swiped to answer. Clara couldn't hear what was said on the other end, but Ethan's usually stoic expression softened with a hint of tenderness. "I'll be right out." Clara's words were cut off. She had keenly heard a woman's voice on the phone, and her heart sank. After hanging up, Ethan paid her no more attention, walking straight out of the study and down the stairs. Clara subconsciously followed. Outside the Westwood Manor, a luxurious and rugged SUV was parked by the entrance. From the driver's seat, a strikingly beautiful woman with sharp features opened the window and waved enthusiastically at Ethan. Ethan walked toward her and glanced at the SUV. Though his tone was stern, it held a rare trace of indulgence. "Scar, this is Northwood City. Drive something else next time." I know, Captain Westwood." The two of them spoke as if no one else existed, completely ignoring Clara standing behind them. After Ethan got in, the SUV sped away. Clara stood rooted to the spot, watching the rapidly departing vehicle. The joy in her heart gradually solidified, then turned into a deep sense of desolation. How could this be? She had waited 4 years for him. She had thought the longing accumulated over those years would burst forth the moment they met, reaching its peak. That would have been the perfect time to confess her true feelings, but things were not going at all as she had imagined. It seemed that not only had he not missed her, he was intentionally distancing himself from her. Chapter 2. Clara Miller was in love with Ethan Westwood. There was no doubt about it. Who wouldn't fall for a man who had spoiled her rotten her entire life? She had loved him since she was 15 and had filled page after page of her secret diary with her feelings for him. June 14th. Uncle Ethan is back, but he seems different. He used to be cold to everyone but me, but today he barely even looked at me. And there's another girl by his side now. He seems to treat her so specially. Late at night, Clara sat at her desk, writing in her diary. The more she thought, the more miserable she felt. She didn't want to wait anymore. She had finally grown up, worked tirelessly to get into a top university, and upon graduation, seamlessly joined the CEO's office at the Westwood Corporation, all so she could stand by his side. Now that Uncle Ethan was finally back, she didn't want to hide her feelings any longer. Clara psyched herself up. She figured she'd see him at the company tomorrow. Now that he was home, it was certain he would take up his responsibilities at Westwood Corp. They would be seeing each other every day. She was sure they could rebuild their former intimacy. With that thought, she felt a little more at ease and soon drifted off to sleep. The next day, in the CEO's office at the Westwood Corporation, Clara indeed saw Ethan Westwood, dressed in a sharp suit. He had always been a standout figure in their elite circle. Though he had abandoned business for the military 4 years ago, his experiences had given his eyes a decisiveness and steadfastness that others lacked. When Ethan saw Clara, dressed in professional attire, walk into his office with a cup of coffee, he stiffened slightly and narrowed his eyes. As Clara set down the coffee, she explained, "Uncle Ethan, I started working at Westwood Corp right after I graduated. I'm your secretary now." Ethan looked her over, a hint of disapproval in his eyes. "You just graduated. Can you handle the job of a CEO's secretary?" Sensing his doubt, Clara quickly replied, I didn't slack off for a single moment in my 4 years of college, all so I could be your secretary." "Uncle Ethan, during work hours, don't call me Uncle Ethan," Ethan reminded her coldly. She froze, then said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Westwood." There it was again. The relationship between them felt just as awkward as it had yesterday. Clara lowered her head, still trying to think of something to say, when Ethan suddenly took several gift bags out of a drawer. Catching the movement out of the corner of her eye, Clara's face lit up instantly, the gloom of the past 2 days vanishing. In the past, no matter where he went, he always remembered to bring her back a gift. And no matter how angry she was with him, his presence would always easily coax her back into a good mood. So, did he realize he had been a bit cold to her these last couple of days? Just as Clara was looking at him with hopeful eyes, Ethan avoided her gaze and said in a low voice, "Have someone deliver these to this address, for this person." He held out a slip of paper between his index and middle fingers. On it was an address and a name she didn't recognize: Scarlett Vance. Seeing the name, her gaze faltered. She remembered the woman from yesterday. Scar, so it was for her. She didn't take the note immediately, instead asking in a daze, "So, these aren't these gifts for me?" Ethan finally looked up at her, his tone utterly cold. "Clara, do what a secretary is supposed to do." She snapped back to reality, dejectedly taking the note from his hand and picking up the gift bags. "Of course, Mr. Westwood." After a respectful nod, she turned and left. Inside the bags were a new Cartier necklace, the latest designer handbag, and a new Chanel dress. It was clear a lot of thought and care had gone into selecting them. Clara's expression dimmed. In the past, Ethan had only ever been this attentive to her. After giving the gifts to a driver, she returned to the office. Ethan was busy with documents. When he heard her report back, he didn't even look up, just gave a soft. But Clara looked at him, finally unable to hold it in any longer. Mr. Westwood, who is Miss Vance? Are you close?" Ethan looked up, the displeasure in his eyes deepening. "First, those questions have nothing to do with your job. Second, my personal life is also none of your business." Clara had never imagined Ethan would speak to her with such a distant tone. Her nose tingled, and she mumbled an apology before retreating from his sharp words, fleeing the office in defeat. Chapter 3, Working with Ethan Westwood, was not what Clara had imagined. She had spent 4 years preparing to become his indispensable right-hand woman, someone who could share his burdens. But in reality, aside from basic, menial tasks, Ethan hardly ever entrusted her with any important work. He seemed to trust the other secretaries in the CEO's office far more than he trusted her. This hurt Clara deeply. What hurt even more was that, just a few days later, she saw Scarlett Vance at the company again. Scarlett was wearing a sexy short dress, looking beautiful and eye-catching. She walked straight toward the CEO's office, a move that made the other employees' jaws drop. Their Mr. Westwood had become even colder since his return. How could this woman be so brazen in his presence? At that moment, Clara happened to be delivering a file to the office. Scarlett glanced at her, looking her up and down with a faint, unreadable expression. Then she turned to Ethan, her tone incredibly intimate. "Didn't we agree to have lunch together?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Just a moment, let me finish up what I'm doing." Scarlett nodded, then turned to the slightly stunned Clara. "Ethan, who's this girl? I think I saw her at your house the other day." Ethan said calmly, "Clara Miller, she's the daughter of a family friend, and my secretary." Hearing how Ethan introduced her, Clara couldn't help but clench her fists. Scarlett, however, smiled knowingly. "I see, it's nice to meet you. I'm Scarlett Vance. Since Ethan and I are about the same age, and you call him Uncle Ethan, you can just call me Scarlett." Clara couldn't tell if it was her imagination, but she felt that Scarlett's seemingly friendly words held a subtle hint of provocation, especially when she brought up their age and the title Uncle Ethan. Clara forced a smile, obediently called her Scarlett, and then left the office in a daze after putting down the file. There was still some time before lunch, and after Scarlett went in, she didn't come back out. The other secretaries outside the office were whispering amongst themselves. Could that be our future Mrs. Westwood? Most likely. Who else would dare to interrupt Mr. Westwood for so long while he's working? It's been 2 hours, and the door is still closed. Who knows what they're doing in there? She's gorgeous. I never thought someone as serious as Mr. Westwood would be into the sexy type. Hearing their comments, Clara felt a sharp pain in her heart, as if it were being pricked by needles. Not long after, Scarlett came out of the office and gave everyone a faint smile, but her expression seemed a bit off as she headed toward the restroom. 3 minutes later, Clara received a text from Ethan. "Get a change of clothes and some pads, take them to Scarlett in the restroom, and make some ginger tea." Reading the short message, Clara's throat tightened. She suddenly remembered when she got her first period at school around 14 or 15. She had been flustered and helpless, and it was he who had rushed to the school to take care of everything for her. But now he was giving that same tenderness to someone else. She suppressed the gloom in her heart and replied with 2 words, "Okay." When she delivered the clothes and pads to the restroom, Scarlett smiled upon seeing her. "Thank you so much, Clara. You're welcome." Scarlett added, "It's a good thing Ethan isn't surrounded by old stubborn fools like his grandfather. It's nice being a family with you." One family? Clara's heart trembled. She didn't want to think too deeply about what Scarlett meant. Could it be that Uncle Ethan really loved her and was even planning to marry her? The thought left Clara distracted for the rest of the day. After work, instead of going home, she headed to the Westwood Manor. When she arrived, she found her great-grandfather and Uncle Ethan standing in the living room, the atmosphere tense and confrontational. Seeing Clara, Elias Westwood reined in his anger slightly, but still slammed his cane on the floor. "The marriage of the Westwood heir is not for you to decide as long as I don't approve. No one is walking through that door." With that, the old man stomped upstairs in a huff. Hearing her great-grandfather's words and thinking about what Scarlett had said earlier, Clara felt even more uneasy. She walked over to Ethan and asked cautiously, "Uncle Ethan, are you planning to marry Scarlett Vance?" Ethan grunted in affirmation. Clara's heart jolted violently, a sharp pain spreading through her limbs. Logic told her she should force a smile and say congratulations, but her emotions made her desperately seek confirmation. "Why so suddenly? Are you sure you're really in love with her?" Ethan frowned. "Are you questioning me?" Clara choked up, lowering her head and muttering, "No, I don't want to see you be so impulsive." Ethan gave her a heavy look. "Me impulsive? You're just a kid. What do you know about love?" A wave of bitterness washed over Clara, and an urge to confess, which she could no longer suppress, rose within her. "Of course I do, Uncle Ethan. I've been in love with someone for 7 years. Chapter 4, the atmosphere fell silent for a moment. Ethan first frowned at her. Then he said in a low voice, "A kid's crush doesn't count." If he had asked just one more question, Clara might have blurted out the secret love she had harbored for years. But he asked nothing, instead coldly dismissing her feelings. He paused, then added, "I am very sure." Scar is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. No matter who tries to stop me, that won't change." After saying that, he didn't spare Clara another glance and turned to leave. Clara's body was still trembling on the way home from the manor. Her eyes felt dry and sore, and an overwhelming urge to cry surged within her. He had promised he would always be by her side. But in the 4 years without her, at some point she didn't know, he had fallen irrevocably in love with someone else. Back in her room, in the dead of night, Clara buried herself under the covers and cried alone for this grand, secret love that seemed to be heading toward its end. Ethan Westwood hadn't been lying. Whatever he set his mind to, no one could change. Even though old Master Westwood disapproved of this Scarlett Vance, who had appeared out of nowhere as his granddaughter-in-law, the Westwood family was no longer a place where his word was absolute law. In the short time since his return, Ethan had swiftly consolidated his power with his decisive methods, becoming the de facto head of the Westwood family. He lacked none of the necessary boldness or means. Disregarding his grandfather's objections, the news that he had brought back a girlfriend quickly spread through their social circles. Perhaps even Elias Westwood understood he could no longer control his grandson. At his own 80th birthday banquet, he could only tacitly allow Ethan to attend with Scarlett. At the Westwood Manor, high society guests mingled, champagne flutes in hand. For Elias Westwood's 80th birthday, only the most influential figures were invited. Clara attended with her parents. When she saw Ethan appear with Scarlett on his arm, Clara's heart clenched. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, however, didn't notice their daughter's strange expression and eagerly pulled her over to exchange pleasantries. Mrs. Miller smiled as she looked Scarlett over. "Ethan, is this your girlfriend?" Ethan nodded politely and corrected her. "Fiancé." Clara fought with all her might to keep her eyes from turning red in such a public setting. He was wearing an expensive, custom-made tuxedo, and Scarlett was dressed in an elegant, respectable gown. They looked perfect together. After Ethan and Scarlett moved on, Clara heard her parents whispering. "I heard she's into everything rally racing, skydiving. Ethan met her on a mission in the army. Seeing her today, she seems quite demure. Not as wild as the old man made her out to be." It's normal for him to worry. With Ethan's status, a gentle, well-bred lady from a prominent family would be a better match. This one not only has a bold personality, but her family background is a bit ordinary. What can you do? Ethan is completely smitten. Look how protective he is of her tonight. He's even defying his grandfather for her. It looks like marriage is just a matter of time. Her parents' voices faded. As Clara listened, the corners of her eyes finally began to redden. It was true. Everyone used to think that the only person worthy of Ethan Westwood would be a debutante from a family of equal social standing. Even Clara had thought so. Although everyone felt Scarlett and Ethan weren't a perfect match, no one knew that in terms of age and status, her own secret love for Ethan was far more taboo. So, to close the gap between them, she had pushed herself to grow up, to become outstanding. She had shed her rebellious and free-spirited nature, cultivating an image of excellence, sensibility, and admirable poise, always moving forward on the track she had set for herself. She thought that by doing so, the distance between them would shrink. But seeing Scarlett now, Clara suddenly felt that perhaps all her efforts had been in the wrong direction. In Ethan's heart, no amount of so-called excellence or compatibility could ever outweigh his love. But he used to love her so much, too. Chapter 5, a bitter taste filled Clara's mouth. She downed 2 glasses of wine and immediately felt dizzy, her body starting to sway. She stumbled, looking for a room to rest in. Suddenly, as she passed a hallway, she heard Scarlett Vance's voice. "Ethan, that niece of yours seems so delicate and frail. Isn't that the type you hate the most? How come I heard you used to dote on her when she was little?" Clara's footsteps froze. "Uncle Ethan hates her?" Her heart seized. Before she could process it, Ethan's calm voice followed. "The other kids were always scared of me. She was the only one young enough to always cling to me, so I just went along with it and humored her." Scarlett let out a knowing "oh." Outside, Clara was completely frozen, her face instantly turning pale. He didn't deny that he hated her. And he said that all his past kindness was just because she was young. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been thrown in her face. Clara was chilled to the bone. Seeing that the people inside were about to come out, she didn't have time to wipe away her tears. She turned and fled. Ignoring the fact that the party wasn't over, she ran home in the dark and locked herself in her room. All those memories she had treasured for years, were they just him casually indulging her? The Ethan who had stayed up for 2 nights, straight to care for her, when she had a fever at 8. The Ethan who told her he would always be on her side, when she was ostracized by classmates at 12. The Ethan who dropped everything to watch her perform at her dance competition when she was 15. How could he say that all of that was just him humoring her? Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Buried under her covers, she felt like she was suffocating from the pain. The next day at work, Clara was, unsurprisingly, completely drained. Her face was pale. Anyone who didn't know better would have thought she was sick. Always the most proactive employee, she even took the initiative to request time off from Ethan. "Why are you requesting time off?" In the CEO's office, Ethan frowned at her leave application. Clara remembered what he'd said the night before, and a sharp pain shot through her heart. "I'm just a little tired." Such a flimsy excuse annoyed Ethan. "Clara, is this what you call professional? How long have you been at it before wanting to back down?" She closed her eyes, wanting to tell him, "It's not like that. You have no idea how long I've been holding on. You have no idea what I've given up to stand by your side. But last night, with just one sentence, you destroyed everything." She kept her head down, silent. Perhaps Ethan noticed how unwell she looked, because his tone finally softened. "Take a few days off. Think carefully about whether you're suited to stay at Westwood Corp." Clara's whole body went rigid. She nodded, turned, and walked out. Watching her slender back, Ethan's gaze darkened. Chapter 6. Although she had requested leave, Clara still had to finish her shift for the day. At noon, while her colleagues all went out for lunch, she remained at her desk, feeling miserable and breaking out in a cold sweat. Ethan came out of his office and saw her looking terribly unwell. His eyes flickered and he walked over to her. His voice carried a concern he had rarely shown her since his return, raspy and tinged with an imperceptible restraint. "Not feeling well?" Hearing the familiar voice, Clara immediately looked up, then shook her head. Ethan's voice deepened again. "Then why aren't you getting lunch?" Clara kept her head down. After a few seconds, her eyes slowly reddened. She looked up at him. "I don't feel well. I don't have an appetite." Seeing the slight redness at the corners of her eyes, Ethan couldn't help but reach out his hand. But halfway there, for some reason, he let it drop. "You still have to eat. Clara, how old are you? Do you still need someone to persuade you to eat?" Clara bit her lip. Just as she was about to speak, Ethan grabbed her arm. "Come with me." He pulled her along without another word, striding toward the elevator. Ethan held her hand all the way to a restaurant near the company. Clara's gloomy mood had started to lift, but it plummeted back to 0 when she saw another person inside. Scarlett Vance smiled and waved at them. "Ethan, Clara, over here." Clara's expression froze. The next second, Ethan quickly let go of her hand and hurried over. Clara glanced at her hand, which still held the warmth from his touch, and gave a bitter smile. The 3 of them sat down. Clara sat alone on one side, while the 2 of them sat together, intimately discussing what to eat. "Clara, is this your first time here? The pasta is really good. Want to try it?" Scarlett recommended. Clara had no appetite to begin with, so she just nodded absently. After ordering her main course, Scarlett wanted to order a dessert. "Ethan, can I have some ice cream?" she asked a little coyly. "No, it's too cold. You can't have it." Ethan refused without hesitation. But Scarlett didn't seem afraid of his anger. She naturally took his hand and wheedled, "Just this once. It won't hurt anything." Whether intentionally or not, she turned to Clara. "Clara, you want some too, right?" Seeing their unabashed intimacy, Clara's heart ached. "I don't need any," she mumbled. She used to love eating ice cream after meals, but Ethan would also control her, not letting her have too much. Somehow, she had slowly given up the habit. Hearing her reply, Ethan looked up, seeming a little surprised. In the end, they didn't order the ice cream. No amount of Scarlett's coaxing worked. Just like with Clara years ago, when Ethan cared for someone, he was uncompromising. When the pasta arrived, Clara ate without tasting a thing. Only Scarlett seemed happy. She had ordered a salad but found the cherry tomatoes too sour. A mischievous impulse struck her, and she picked one up, holding it to Ethan's lips. "Just try it." Ethan had always been a bit of a germaphobe. How could he possibly eat food from someone else's plate, even if it was just a piece of fruit? But that was Clara's impression of the old Ethan. Now, he just gave a helpless, low chuckle and opened his mouth to eat the cherry tomato. How does it taste? Anything you feed me tastes good. Scarlett's heart fluttered. Seeing the desolate look in Clara's eyes across the table, she gave a triumphant smile. Chapter 7. The meal was torture for Clara. She remained in a daze even after returning to the office. She finally made it to the end of the day, but as if the heavens were against her, it had started to rain outside, and it wasn't a light drizzle. Clara didn't have an umbrella, and trying to get a cab at this hour in this weather would mean waiting at least 2 hours. Her heart was already heavy. Not wanting to wait around in the office, she simply dashed out into the rain. Within moments, she was soaked to the bone. Walking home in the rain had at least one benefit. No one could tell if the streaks on your face were tears or raindrops. Perfect for a heartbroken person like me, Clara thought. But she had only been walking for a few minutes when a sharp honk sounded from behind her. Clara stopped. A Maybach had pulled up beside her. Ethan rolled down the driver's side window, his face ashen. "Get in." Ethan had always been strict. Seeing him angry, Clara was intimidated and got into the car with her head down. She sat in the back, rainwater dripping onto the expensive leather seats, but she remained silent. It was Ethan who spoke, his voice laced with anger. "Are you a child? You don't even know how to get out of the rain?" Clara pressed her lips together and said nothing. Ethan watched her stubborn reflection in the rearview mirror, as if looking at a disobedient child. She wished so badly that he would comfort her gently like he used to. After a long moment, she choked out, "You hate me anyway, so why do you care what I do?" Ethan froze, apparently not expecting her to say that. Clara, however, seemed to have found an outlet for her grief. "Uncle Ethan, was all that kindness you showed me when I was a kid fake? If it was fake, how could you keep it up for so many years? And if it was real, why are you so distant now?" Perhaps her tone was too sorrowful because it took Ethan a while to reply. "What nonsense are you talking about? You're grown up now, don't be so willful. You promised you would always be with me. Do you remember?" Ethan paused. "Clara, don't be so naive. It's just something you say to a kid. Who would take it seriously?" Clara felt as if her heart was about to shatter. She suddenly raised her voice. "But I did." The man said nothing more, and the car fell into a heavy silence. When the car stopped in front of the Miller house, Clara's eyes were filled with tears, but she stubbornly held them back. She opened the door to get out, but Ethan stopped her, handing her an umbrella. "Take this. Don't get soaked again." Clara bit her lip, silently took the umbrella, and walked toward her house. In the car, Ethan watched her retreating back and pressed his temples wearily. Inside, Mrs. Miller was heartbroken to see her daughter drenched. She rushed her to take a hot shower and then made her some ginger tea. Clara silently showered and drank the tea before her mother sent her upstairs to rest. Despite all that, the rain made her illness worse. A fierce cold hit her, and she developed a fever that night. Her parents took her to the hospital in a daze, where she was put on an IV drip. She didn't return home until the next morning. Fortunately, she had already requested leave, so she could rest at home for a few days. Lying in her room, though she was reluctant to admit it, she couldn't help but hope that he would come to see her. Whenever she used to get sick, he was always the one who would patiently and gently coax her. He would take tender care of her, and when she refused to take her medicine, he would hold the pill in one hand and a piece of candy in the other, cajoling her. "Clara, you can have the candy after you take your medicine." But this time, Ethan never appeared. Her heart sank to the bottom again, and she spent her days listless and unhappy. Luckily, the cold came on fast and left just as quickly. By the third day, Clara was feeling much better. Mrs. Miller came to personally supervise her daughter taking her medicine and noticed her little face was still downcast. "What's wrong, Clara? Not feeling well?" Clara shook her head, her heart aching as she thought of the uncle who hadn't shown up even once. After a moment, she couldn't help but ask, "Has Uncle Ethan been home these past 2 days?" She only wanted to find out if Ethan knew she was sick, but her mother dropped a bombshell. "No, he hasn't. Your Uncle Ethan, he's in the hospital." Chapter 8. Clara panicked immediately, sitting bolt upright in bed. What happened to him? When was he admitted? Mrs. Miller knew she had always been close to Ethan. "Don't worry, I heard it was a flare-up of some old injuries. He was hospitalized the night before last. Before she could finish, Clara was already scrambling out of bed, looking nothing like a sick person. Clara ran without looking back. "I'm going to see Uncle Ethan outside, St. Anne's Hospital." Clara got out of the taxi and rushed toward the hospital. No matter how hurt she was, it couldn't suppress her concern for him. As she ran toward the entrance, she couldn't stop wondering about his injuries. Is it serious? What kind of injury? How did he get hurt? She had so many questions, but just as she reached the hospital entrance, a hand stopped her. She instinctively paused and turned to see Scarlett Vance's impatient eyes. "Clara, don't go in." The disgust in Scarlett's eyes was so palpable that Clara's heart trembled. Although she had sensed that Scarlett didn't seem to like her, Scarlett had at least been civil during their previous encounters. Why the sudden, undisguised animosity? Before she could speak, Scarlett gave her a hard shove. "Clara Miller, are you here to harm Ethan again?" Clara stumbled backward, nearly falling. Even with her good upbringing, she couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. "Scarlett, what do you mean? What do you mean, harm Uncle Ethan again?" Scarlett's tone grew even colder. "Ha, Uncle Ethan, do you really see him as your uncle? If it wasn't for your shameless crush on your own uncle, why would he have run off to join the army to get away from you?" What the words exploded in Clara's ears like a clap of thunder. Her face drained of color. After a long moment, she asked blankly, "WH what? You have a diary, don't you?" Scarlett's voice dripped with contempt. "4 years ago, Ethan saw your diary. To crush your feelings, he left to become a special forces soldier. He's been through hell these past 4 years, facing countless dangers, covered in every kind of scar. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say he nearly died in the military. That's why his old injuries flared up this time. Clara, this is all your fault." Clara didn't know how she made it to the hospital room door. Scarlett's words were like a bomb that left her entire body shaking. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand, leaving her breathless. Westwood family bodyguards stood outside the room. No wonder Scarlett had only dared to stop her outside the hospital. Clara's eyes were red as she pushed open the door and walked in. Ethan was propped up in the hospital bed, holding a tablet, likely dealing with work. His face was still pale, and his right hand was wrapped in gauze, with faint bloodstains seeping through a shocking sight. Scarlett had said it was a gunshot wound from a mission 2 years ago. Seeing Clara, Ethan put down his tablet. "What are you doing here?" Clara stared at his injury, her body feeling as if it had been pierced by hundreds of arrows. But that pain was nothing compared to the suffering he must have endured. Gunshot wounds, knife wounds, broken ribs, a broken hand, and the culprit, it turned out, was her. Clara looked at him in silence. The obsession she had clung to for years suddenly seemed ridiculous. After a long pause, she took a deep breath and spoke. "Uncle Ethan, you've always known I love you, haven't you?" Clara stared intently into his eyes, and this time she clearly saw the flash of irritation when she said the word, love. She let out a self-deprecating laugh. "You knew all along that I loved you, but you never thought of accepting me. You just wanted to distance yourself from me, be cold to me. You even left to avoid me, getting yourself covered in scars rather than coming back. Is that right?" Her voice was terrifyingly calm, but beneath it lay an immense sea of sorrow. Chapter 9. Ethan watched her in silence for a few seconds before saying coldly, "Don't say any more." Seeing him unwilling to face her feelings, Clara trembled but continued, "This isn't about the past. Even now, at this very moment, I still love you very much." Ethan's brow furrowed instantly. "Clara, do you have any idea what you're saying?" "I know. Uncle Ethan, I always thought you joined the army 4 years ago to fulfill a childhood dream. So while you were gone, I worked as hard as I could to grow up, to become someone worthy of standing by your side. I thought when you came back, we would both have achieved our dreams and could finally be together. But it turns out you left just to get away from me. Do you really hate me that much?" Her hands were shaking, her voice trembling. "Joining the army, the special forces, you'd rather risk your life than be loved by me?" Ethan's hand clenched unconsciously, but his expression remained merciless. After a few seconds, he replied coldly, "That's right. Between you and me, we can only be uncle and niece. Anything else is absolutely impossible." After he answered, he saw the unmistakable despair and agony in Clara's eyes. Her tears flowed uncontrollably, her entire body shaking. "Clara, this is the answer you've waited 4 years for. Did you hear it clearly? Her breath hitched. She couldn't stay another second and ran out of the room. Back home, she locked herself in her room and cried for the entire night. She read through the diaries she had written over the years, tears streaming down her face. Reading the words she had written when she first realized she loved Ethan, her heart ached unbearably. March 12th. I think I'm in love with my uncle. I know I shouldn't, but I can't control it. Every time I see him, my heart pounds. Is this what love feels like? April 27th. It took me a whole month to be sure. Uncle Ethan, I really do love you. And I only love you. June 15th. Uncle Ethan, my only birthday wish this year is to grow up quickly so I can stand by your side. September 20th. Uncle Ethan, Clara will work hard to be the best she can be. One day we'll be together forever. November 22nd. Uncle Ethan, I heard you're going to be a soldier. That's okay. Go and fulfill your dream. I will wait for you. I'll always wait for you. When you come back, Clara will be all grown up. Looking at the naive and fervent words, her tears fell like broken strings of pearls. Clara, you're so ridiculous. You thought your love was so precious. In reality, he couldn't wait to get away from it. Scarlett was right. It was you. You were the one who pushed the uncle who was so good to you into such a dangerous place. She didn't know how much time had passed. In the silence of the night, Clara choked back sobs and wrote one last sentence in her diary. January 16th. Uncle Ethan, I'm sorry. From now on, I don't love you anymore. She opened her door again the next morning. Her parents had been terrified by the sounds from her room the night before and had barely slept. Clara, what's wrong? Clara's eyes were swollen like walnuts. She said quietly, Mom, Dad, I want to leave the country, as far away as possible, and I want to leave right away. 3 days later, Ethan was discharged from the hospital and returned to the company. Clara's requested leave was over, and before coming to the office, he had been wondering how he would face her. But to his surprise, Clara wasn't there. The person who always meticulously prepared his coffee and documents the moment he arrived was gone. After another secretary put down his coffee, Ethan couldn't help but ask, "Where's Clara?" The secretary was taken aback. Secretary Miller resigned. Ethan's brow twitched. What did you say? Secretary Miller came in yesterday to complete her resignation procedures. She handed over her work and left. Seeing the boss's expression, the secretary quietly left the office. Ethan remained frozen, his mind buzzing. She resigned. Does that mean she's given up? But for some reason, the thought only brought a wave of panic. Uncontrollably, he pulled out his phone and dialed Clara's number without hesitation. Ring, ring, ring. Each ring felt like a drumbeat against his heart. Just when he thought she would never answer, the call connected. Clara stood at the airport boarding gate, pulling her suitcase. Uncle Ethan? Ethan's hand holding the phone tightened abruptly. Where are you? Clara's voice was devoid of emotion. I'm at the airport. Uncle Ethan, I'm sorry for bothering you all this time. I was too selfish, always thinking that love conquered all. From now on, I promise, you will never see me again. Ethan's throat felt blocked, and he couldn't get a single word out. As he frowned, trying to say something, she had already hung up decisively. You will never see me again. You will never see me again. You will never see me again. The words were like a curse, stripping him of all reason. Ethan frantically redialed her number, but the mechanical voice that answered was like a bucket of cold water poured over his head. She had blocked him. Chapter 10, he didn't know how much time had passed before Ethan's hand dropped limply to his side. He sat stunned at his desk, his face dark, not saying a word. Clara had said she was at the airport. What she planned to do next was obvious. After hearing the automated message, the user you have dialed is currently unavailable, again and again, Ethan's frantic heart finally began to calm. Clara was gone. She had completely vanished from his sight. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that what he wanted from the very beginning? Ethan opened the folder on his desk, forcing himself to work, but found he couldn't concentrate at all. Clara had been his assistant for less than half a month, yet every time he looked at the documents before him, her slender figure would inevitably appear in his mind. After 4 years, Clara was no longer the young girl who had just reached adulthood. She had shed her youthful innocence and become a woman who could stand by his side. Ethan still remembered the day she walked into his office in her professional attire. That visual impact was a constant reminder that his feelings for Clara had long since crossed the line of a simple uncle-niece relationship. If not for that, Ethan wouldn't have pushed her away time and time again. From the moment he first realized his feelings were not quite right, Ethan began to force himself to keep a distance from Clara. Before, their closeness was based on simple family affection, but once Ethan confronted his true feelings, he could no longer deceive himself. He didn't want to be Clara's uncle, but that was all he could be. That's why, when he was working at Westwood Corp, he avoided any direct work contact with her beyond token, basic tasks. He was afraid he would lose control. Out of sight, out of mind. But now, Ethan realized he was wrong. Because even when he wasn't looking at her, he was still thinking of her. And not just now. Back then, after rejecting Clara's confession in the hospital room, his mind had been filled with the haunting image of her sorrowful face. Even during the 4 years he was away from Northwood City, enlisted in the army, in every free moment and every sleepless night, his mind was filled with Clara. Scarlett was right. 4 years ago, Ethan had fled, abandoning business for the military, all to extinguish Clara's feelings for him. But what Scarlett didn't know was that Ethan wasn't just trying to extinguish Clara's feelings, he was also trying to extinguish his own. Unfortunately, it was only now that Ethan realized that both of his goals had failed. Ethan tugged at his tie in frustration. When he had returned to Northwood City after his discharge, he had thought he was prepared to face Clara. But he found that all his preparations became useless the moment he saw her again. Her bright eyes were full of love for him, a sight that made his heart tremble. He, a man who had walked through hails of bullets and endured countless wounds, had discovered that no injury, no matter how severe, was more painful than wanting what he couldn't have. Even though he had imagined being with her 1,000 times, when he faced her, he could only utter cold, harsh words. Those cold, hurtful words were like a double-edged sword, wounding him just as much as they wounded Clara. Between you and me, we can only be uncle and niece. Anything else is absolutely impossible. That sentence was a rejection of Clara, and at the same time, a warning to himself. Clara could only be the niece of a family friend, and his own wild, growing feelings for her must never be revealed. Chapter 11, Ethan swiveled his office chair to face the window, looking out at the endless blue sky from the top floor. Just then, a plane streaked across the sky, leaving a white trail against the azure backdrop. Ethan's eyes darkened. Clara, since you've made up your mind to leave, don't ever appear before me again. Otherwise, Ethan didn't know if he would have enough self-control. After an unknown amount of time, the door to the CEO's office was pushed open. Hearing the sound, Ethan frowned instinctively. 4 years in the Special Forces had left their mark. Though he was now a civilian, the cold demeanor and the sharp instincts honed by years of rigorous training were ingrained in his very bones. The moment the high heels clicked into his office, he knew it was Scarlett Vance. Ethan swiveled his chair back around. His cold, hard face was the calm before a storm. Seeing this, Scarlett immediately hesitated. Although they had known each other for years through a chance encounter, Scarlett was still a little afraid of Ethan when he wore that icy expression. In this world, she was the only woman who had seen what Ethan Westwood was like during those 4 years as a Special Forces soldier. Scarlett came from a prominent military family. Her father was Ethan's superior officer in the army, and her family lived near the base where Ethan was stationed. Though she was strikingly beautiful, perhaps due to her family's influence, Scarlett had always been a thrill seeker. Off-roading, skydiving, rock climbing, shooting if it was exciting, Scarlett did it. If her father hadn't, knowing the hardships of military life, strictly forbidden her from enlisting, Scarlett would likely have become an outstanding female soldier. She loved a challenge and was no less capable than any man, so it was only natural that she was drawn to strength. Thus, after getting to know Ethan, it was almost inevitable that she fell for the handsome and brilliant man after just a few encounters. She had heard that Ethan was the unbeatable legend of the military district and her father's most capable subordinate. Scarlett had thought that, given her father's fondness for Ethan, he would surely promote him, and Ethan would climb the ranks to become an officer. Then, they would naturally end up together. Scarlett never doubted her own appearance or charm. After all, the number of men pursuing her on base could circle the entire military district, but her heart belonged only to Ethan. Scarlett was proud. Although she gradually grew closer to Ethan, she never revealed her feelings. She wanted Ethan to fall in love with her and pursue her on his own. But as she got closer, Scarlett discovered Ethan's secret. One day, during a military leave, Scarlett went to the base to find Ethan as usual, only to see him sitting silently under the shade of a tree, lost in thought as he gazed at a photograph. It was a look Scarlett had never seen on Ethan's face before, and it made her heart clench instinctively. She followed his gaze and saw a photograph of a beautiful girl. The girl was wearing a blue and white checkered skirt and a white blouse, with her hair in a neat ponytail. It looked like a high school graduation photo. Chapter 12, a slight unnaturalness tinged Scarlett's voice. "Ethan, is this your sister?" Her sharp instincts told her the photo was slightly yellowed, clearly something he carried with him all the time and treasured immensely. Ethan didn't look at her, simply shaking his head. "A kid from a family friend's?" That single sentence shattered Scarlett's lingering hopes. She had never imagined that Ethan already had someone in his heart, nor had she ever imagined that he would leave the army when his military career was so promising. "Scar, from now on, remember to knock before entering my office." Ethan's harsh words broke through Scarlett's reverie. She gave a bitter smile and asked, as if to torture herself, "Why start today? Is it because she's gone, so you don't have to put on a show for her anymore?" Ethan's expression faltered at her words, and he frowned. "I don't know what you're talking about." But Scarlett strode forward, her voice choked with emotion. "You really don't? Then I'll be more direct. You asked me to help you pretend to be a couple, saying it was to fend off your grandfather's matchmaking attempts. But the truth is, you just wanted to make Clara give up, because you love her, but you don't dare to be with her. Isn't that right?" Hearing Scarlett so bluntly expose his feelings for Clara, Ethan's face immediately darkened and his tone grew icy. "Scar, you're overstepping." Scarlett laughed self-deprecatingly. "Yes, I overstepped a long time ago. Ethan, I've been in love with you for a long time. Did you know that?" Ethan froze, clearly not expecting her to say this. He had always been cool and distant, with no interest in women, and he had no female cousins. During his 4 years in the army, apart from Scarlett, there wasn't so much as a female mosquito around him. Ethan was close to Scarlett because he admired her straightforward personality and because she was his commanding officer's daughter. As for anything else, there was nothing. Although Ethan was aware of his unusual feelings for Clara, he didn't really understand love, so he had never noticed Scarlett's feelings for him. Her confession now left him at a loss. How had a perfectly good friendship turned into something else? He frowned, about to say something, but Scarlett continued, "Ethan Westwood, I've loved you for many years, ever since we first met. I thought, since you were so well liked by my father, you would have a long career in the military, and we could naturally end up together. After all, you had no other women in your life besides me. When I heard you were leaving the army, I was heartbroken. I thought we would never have a chance to see each other again. So I decided to risk it all and confess to you, hoping you would reconsider staying for my sake. But that night, you came to me and asked me to return to Northwood City with you. You wanted me to play the part of your fiancé in front of your grandfather to stop his matchmaking. Ethan, you have no idea how excited I was when you told me that. I thought you liked me too, and that's why you asked for my help. It wasn't until I met that girl from the photograph you always carried, that kid from a family friend's, that I realized I had already lost. 4 years ago, when you came to the army, I thought it was a choice you made at a crossroads in your life. I never knew you were just treating these 4 years as a journey to escape your feelings." Chapter 13, as Scarlett spoke incoherently, Ethan's frown deepened. He hadn't known that Scarlett had been in love with him for so long. And it was at this moment that Ethan realized his reaction to Clara's confession and Scarlett's confession were completely different. When Clara confessed, he was moved and pained, needing to exercise immense restraint to maintain his cold facade. But with Scarlett's confession, beyond the shock, he only felt helplessness. As Scarlett said, his 4 years in the military were just a journey. All the friends he made and the unique experiences he had were precious gains from that journey. But unfortunately, from the very beginning, Ethan had never planned for Scarlett to be part of his future. They could only be friends. Seeing Ethan's impassive expression, Scarlett wiped away her tears and finally managed a relieved smile. I, Scarlett Vance, have never been one to cling to something I can't have. Your attitude today tells me you will never fall for me, so, from today on, I will stop loving you. After all, they were old friends, and she was his former superior's daughter. Ethan faltered, then softened his tone. Scar, that's the best way to think about it. I am not worthy of your love. Scarlett took a tissue from his desk and dried her tears, her dramatic posture vanishing. Only her voice still held a hint of a sob. You're right. What's so great about being loved by you? Clara has suffered no less than I have. At that, Ethan fell silent for a long moment. The image of Clara's despairing and pained eyes before she left flashed in his mind, and a sharp pang of guilt shot through him. Seeing his expression, Scarlett knew that things between him and Clara were not pleasant. Although they couldn't be lovers, they were still friends. She knew Ethan's stubborn nature well. Once he got stuck in a corner, he could be ruthless to anyone. Ruthless to others, and even more so to himself. Otherwise, Ethan could not have become the unbeatable legend of the military district. And in the short half-month since his return, he had already made great strides in the Northwood City business world. But love wasn't a mission, nor was it a business deal. It couldn't be solved with such a cold and rigid mindset, so Scarlett couldn't help but try to talk some sense into him. Ethan, are you sure you won't regret this? Pushing Clara away so harshly like this, what if you regret it one day? You might never be able to win her back. Ethan's eyes were deep pools of darkness. His hand, holding a fine pen, tightened. After a long time, he spoke faintly, I never regret anything. Chapter 14. 3 years passed peacefully. The already formidable Westwood Corporation, under Ethan Westwood's leadership, had firmly secured its position as the top conglomerate in Northwood City. Even Elias Westwood had to admit that, although he hadn't approved of it, Ethan's 4 years in the Special Forces had brought him considerable benefits. The Ethan of today was decisive and efficient in the business world, never dragging things out, inspiring awe in all who dealt with him. Looking at his brilliant and stoic grandson, Elias felt a mix of pride and a nagging headache. Ethan, when are you going to bring a girlfriend home for your grandpa to see? That fiancée you brought back 3 years ago, even though her family background was a bit lacking, Ethan put down his chopsticks, calmly interrupting his grandfather. Grandpa, I explained this to you 3 years ago. Scar and I are just friends. We were just putting on an act for you. Please stop trying to play matchmaker. 3 years ago, Ethan and Scarlett had confessed everything to Elias, admitting their relationship was just a friendship. Elias had been relieved, but then immediately started worrying again. So the one girlfriend he had managed to bring home was fake. How long was Ethan going to stay single? And for the past 3 years, every blind date Elias arranged for him was brushed aside by Ethan with the excuse of being too busy with work, needing to establish his career before starting a family. As a result, Ethan was still a bachelor, which was a constant source of worry for Elias. At Ethan's age, Elias already had a son. Ethan, on the other hand, was still single. Elias sighed, trying to reason with him. Ethan, since you and Miss Vance are just friends and you haven't taken a fancy to any other girl, why not meet the ones I introduce you to? You said you wanted to establish your career before settling down. Well, Westwood Corp is bigger and stronger than ever. Wouldn't you say your career is established? When are you going to get married and grant me this one wish? Are you really going to let your old grandpa miss out on your wedding? Hearing his grandfather mention a loved one, Ethan's hand holding the chopsticks paused. The image of a certain beautiful figure surfaced in his mind. 3 years. Clara had been gone from Northwood City for 3 years. She was truly ruthless. Not a single trip back in 3 years. She was really determined never to appear before him again. Realizing what he was thinking, Ethan froze. He was the one who pushed her away. What right did he have to complain now? Even though he missed her like crazy. Seeing Ethan lost in thought, Elias couldn't resist tapping him with the back of his chopsticks. You brat, you play dumb every time I mention finding a girlfriend. I don't care. I've arranged for you to meet the Shaw family's daughter tomorrow after work. You have to go, no matter what. Otherwise, I'll pretend I don't have a grandson. Ethan felt helpless, but knew his grandfather's stubbornness. He had no choice but to agree. The next evening, Ethan, for once, didn't work late. He followed the address his grandfather had sent him and arrived at the designated restaurant early. When Rosalind Shaw rushed in, Ethan was momentarily stunned. The woman standing before him bore a striking resemblance to Clara. Chapter 15, Rosalind Shaw sat down opposite Ethan, looking shy. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Westwood. I'm late." Ethan snapped back to reality and glanced at the clock behind her. It was exactly 6 o'clock. He smiled slightly. "No, I was early." Rosalind nodded, a little embarrassed. She clearly hadn't expected her grandfather's blind date setup to be so handsome. When her grandfather mentioned that the man was older and had never been in a relationship, she had instinctively assumed he must not be very good-looking. But Ethan's distinguished and cool demeanor didn't look like someone who would lack admirers. Ethan pushed the menu toward her politely. "Miss Shaw, please see what you'd like to eat. The ingredients at this restaurant are all flown in from abroad, so the quality is guaranteed." Rosalind thanked him and took the menu. It was then that Ethan noticed it wasn't just her eyes and brows that resembled Clara's. She even had a small mole under her left eye, just like Clara. The similarity was so striking that it instantly pulled Ethan back into the feelings he had been trying so hard to avoid. For the past 3 years, Ethan had packed his work and life schedule to the brim, all to prevent himself from having any idle time. He didn't want to think about Clara, and he certainly didn't want to look for news about her. But some things couldn't be escaped just by avoiding them. The dinner went pleasantly enough. Rosalind, who had been nervous at first, gradually relaxed after discovering Ethan was quite emotionally intelligent. She couldn't help but say, "Mr. Westwood, before I came here today, I honestly thought you would be an ugly, pot-bellied, middle-aged man." Ethan nearly spilled his tea. "Why would you think that?" Rosalind said, embarrassed. "Because when your grandfather introduced you, he said you were getting on in years and still single, had never even been in a relationship. He also said you were stubborn and seemed to only have work on your mind." Ethan faltered. That was his dear grandfather, badmouthing him to outsiders. Seeing the change in Ethan's expression, Rosalind quickly explained, "But the moment I saw you, I knew my imagination had run wild. You're handsome and your manners are impeccable. You're a very charming, high-quality man." Ethan chuckled lightly, accepting the compliment. "In that case, Miss Shaw, why did you agree to this blind date without knowing me?" Rosalind looked helpless. "It's my family. They say I'm 26 and still prefer to stay home composing music instead of going out and meeting people. They don't know when I'll ever find a boyfriend, so they pushed me into this. I was so tired of their nagging that I had no choice but to come." Ethan took a sip of his tea, understanding completely. She was in the same boat as him, being pushed into marriage. Perhaps because she looked so much like Clara, Ethan found himself being more patient with her. Normally, he would never spend time outside of work making small talk with a strange woman. But resemblance or not, Ethan knew he could never see Rosalind as a substitute for Clara. Some people were simply irreplaceable. Chapter 16, Ethan placed his teacup on the saucer with a soft clink. Then, he spoke slowly. "Miss Shaw, to be honest, we're in the same predicament. My family forced me to come on this blind date as well. Since neither of us is interested in the other, I believe we both know how this will end." Rosalind nodded, understanding his meaning. But as they were about to part ways, she couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Westwood, you're exceptionally handsome, and your family background is impeccable. Logically, many women should be flocking to you. Why are you on a blind date?" Ethan paused for a moment, then said faintly, "Because I'm in love with someone." Hearing this, Rosalind's expression showed a hint of surprise, and she grew even more confused. "If that's the case, then why?" Ethan's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. "I have my reasons." Rosalind had grown up sheltered and privileged. With her introverted nature, she hadn't experienced much of the world's harshness. After graduating from college, she became one of Northwood City's most sought-after composers thanks to her extraordinary talent. And she spent most of her time holed up in her studio. Her life was steeped in art, so when she heard Ethan's story-filled sentence, her mind immediately concocted a dramatic tale of a powerful CEO in love with a destitute Cinderella, kept apart by their families. Rosalind patted Ethan's shoulder sympathetically. "You can do it, Mr. Westwood. With your abilities, you can overcome any obstacle." Ethan was baffled, having no idea what she was talking about. Just then, the car sent by the Shaw family arrived, and the two said a hasty goodbye. The next morning, Just as Ethan was getting up, Elias Westwood rushed over from the old family manor to his private villa, leaning on a walking stick, huffing and puffing. "You brat, when did you fall in love with a destitute Cinderella? Why didn't I know about it, Cinderella?" Ethan, for once, looked genuinely bewildered. What was wrong with his grandfather so early in the morning? Elias tapped Ethan with his cane, exasperated. "Last night, I called the Shaw girl to ask what she thought of you. And you know what she said? She gave me a whole lecture about how love isn't easy, how we shouldn't insist on matching social statuses in the 21st century, and how Cinderella and the prince can live happily ever after. She talked in circles for ages, but the gist was that she hopes I can understand you and not force you to marry someone you don't love. Now, what is all this about?" Ethan was silent for a moment before realizing that Rosalind must have misunderstood his reasons from the previous day. The misunderstanding was just a bit extreme, but he had to admit Rosalind was quite loyal, even standing up to his grandfather on his behalf. Ethan rubbed his forehead, exasperated. "Grandpa, please don't get carried away. There's no Cinderella. Miss Shaw wasn't interested in me, so she made that up. Don't take it to heart." Elias was dissatisfied. "I finally set you up with a nice girl, and she's not even interested in you. I don't know what to say to you." Ethan didn't respond to his grandfather's grumbling and prepared to leave for work, but Elias grabbed his arm. Chapter 17. "Where do you think you're going?" "I'm not finished." Ethan had no choice but to stop. "Grandpa, what other instructions do you have?" Elias grumpily pulled an invitation from his pocket and handed it to Ethan. "This is an invitation to a reception from the Croft family. I'm too old for these things. Since you're in charge of the family now, you can go and represent us." Hearing the name Croft, Ethan was surprised. "The Crofts, didn't they move their business abroad years ago?" Elias snorted, clearly not having forgiven Ethan yet, but still explained, "Your old friend, Mr. Croft's health has been declining these past 2 years. He wants to return to Northwood City to live out his retirement. You know how our generation feels about returning to our roots. So, the young master of the Croft family has come back with him to open a branch here. This is an invitation to their welcome reception. It signals their return to Northwood City's high society. Years ago, the Croft family helped us out a lot. Now that they might need a hand, we should return the favor. So, you must attend this reception tonight and build a good relationship with the young Mr. Croft." Ethan nodded, making a mental note of it. The Crofts had been very successful abroad. Logically, they shouldn't need his help to expand into the Northwood City market. But more friends meant more opportunities, and a future partnership was always a good thing. So, during the day at Westwood Corp., Ethan had his secretary look up information on this young Master Croft. The Croft family's main business abroad was film production, and they had close ties with several major film companies. Therefore, Julian Croft, the young master, planned to do the same in Northwood City by opening an entertainment company. Westwood Corp had never ventured into film production and promotion, but there was no conflict of interest. There might be opportunities for collaboration in the future. Ethan briefly reviewed Julian Croft's recent activities and found himself impressed. He hadn't expected Julian, who was only 27, to be so astute and forward-thinking. He seemed like a worthy partner. For the past 3 years, Ethan had rarely attended such receptions. His appearance in the ballroom immediately drew a lot of attention. He was dressed in a pure black handmade suit with a matching black silk shirt. Dressed entirely in black, he looked mature and captivating. Many people wanted to approach him and chat, but he skillfully avoided them all. Ethan had never liked these kinds of social events. His 4 years in the Special Forces had taught him to be direct and let his actions speak for themselves. He couldn't stand the fake smiles and hypocrisy he often saw at these gatherings. He despised the underhanded tactics and false flattery, but since he couldn't change it, he chose to avoid it. His only reason for attending tonight was to meet the renowned young Master Croft, to appease his grandfather, and to show support for the Croft family. With a clear goal in mind, Ethan began to scan the ballroom for the star of the evening, Julian Croft. Chapter 18. Fortunately, some people are born to be the center of attention. Finding them requires little effort. Within a few steps, Ethan spotted a tall figure with his back to him, clinking glasses with someone. That must be the man of the hour, Julian Croft. He held a champagne flute in his right hand, while his left arm was held by a woman in a shimmering white dress. From Ethan's angle, Julian's body blocked most of the woman from view, and he had no interest in investigating further. It was common to bring a date to a reception. Ethan rarely did, but that didn't mean others didn't. He had no interest in other people's companions. He gave a cursory glance and walked straight toward Julian. But as he approached, he heard the man toasting Julian say, "I've long heard that Mr. Croft has a beautiful and capable assistant by his side. Seeing you both today, I understand the magic. Mr. Croft and Secretary Miller, a talented man and a beautiful woman, it's truly enviable, Secretary Miller." The long, unheard title made Ethan's heart stir. He couldn't help but shift his gaze to the woman beside Julian. Julian had also returned from abroad. Could the Secretary Miller by his side be her? Ethan's heart pounded. He looked intently at the woman whose face was obscured. Long, wavy hair cascaded over her shoulders, and a form-fitting white dress accentuated a near-perfect figure. Even from the back, it was clear she was a stunning beauty. This elegant silhouette began to merge with the one that haunted his dreams, and Ethan quickened his pace. As he drew closer, Ethan finally got a clear look. It was indeed the very figure he had been thinking of day and night. The legendary female secretary who had been by Julian Croft's side for years was actually Clara when he saw her lovely face clearly. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had never imagined that he would be reunited with Clara under these circumstances. Mr. Thompson, who was toasting Julian, saw Ethan approaching and greeted him enthusiastically. "Mr. Westwood, you're here too." Mr. Thompson didn't notice Ethan's dark expression. In his eyes, Ethan's expression was never pleasant. Hearing this, Julian also turned his gaze toward Ethan, a hint of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected the head of the Westwood family to come. When Julian sent the invitation, he hadn't really thought Ethan would attend. Seeing him now was a pleasant surprise. He raised his glass in a toast, a polite smile on his face. "Mr. Westwood, it's an honor." Following Julian's gaze was Clara, who was still holding his arm. Ethan's eyes had been fixed on Clara's face, so when their gazes met, he clearly saw the calm, emotionless look in her eyes. Chapter 19, the sight sent another pang of pain through Ethan's heart. In all the years they had known each other, Clara had never looked at him with such cold eyes. Despite the storm raging inside him, Ethan's expression remained composed. He strode forward, walked up to Julian Croft, and lightly tapped his glass. "Mr. Croft, a pleasure," he said, equally polite. Seeing Julian down his champagne in one go, Clara glanced at him and did the same with the little bit left in her own glass. Watching this display of perfect synchronicity between Clara and Julian, Ethan's eyes darkened. Clara's skin was fair, and her slender hand, wrapped around Julian's arm amidst the dark gray of his suit, was particularly eye-catching. The sight filled Ethan with a simmering impatience. Ethan had always considered himself a calm, self-possessed man who never had regrets. But now, seeing Clara dressed to the nines, her head lowered demurely while holding another man's arm, he had to admit he was more than a little annoyed. It felt as if a long-hidden treasure of his had been discovered by someone else. It was the first meeting between the two titans, and a bit of conversation was inevitable. Clara listened with her head lowered for a few moments, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. She could feel the man opposite them letting his gaze linger on her, a sensation like a feather constantly brushing against her skin, making her heart itch. Clara tugged on Julian's sleeve. He instinctively turned his head slightly toward her. Ethan, who had been watching Clara intently, also stopped speaking and looked at them. Clara didn't meet Ethan's gaze. Instead, she rose on her tiptoes, cupped her hand to Julian's ear, and whispered something. Julian nodded and patted the back of her hand. Seeing this, Ethan couldn't help but clench his jaw. The way they acted so intimately, as if no one else was there, nearly made him lose control. From beginning to end, Clara's eyes had never rested on him. It was as if he were a complete stranger. And from beginning to end, her hand had been tightly clasped on Julian's arm. Combined with what Mr. Thompson had said earlier about them being a talented man and a beautiful woman, the envy of all, what did it mean? Were they a couple? The thought sent a rush of blood to Ethan's head. He had thought he could handle the fact that he and Clara could never be together, that she would eventually be with another man. He had never felt this way before, but that was because he had never seen it with his own eyes. Now, just seeing Clara whisper in another man's ear was enough to make him burn with jealousy. The little girl whose eyes used to be filled with tenderness for him was now standing by another man's side. And after 3 years, she treated him with nothing but cold indifference, not even offering a polite greeting. Was she trying to cut all ties with him completely? Seeing Clara's graceful body leaning against Julian, Ethan's brow furrowed, and he tightened his grip on his champagne flute. Chapter 20. Unfortunately, in that moment, Ethan forgot his own strength, honed by years as a Special Forces soldier. In an instant, the stem of the champagne flute snapped. With a crash, it shattered on the floor. The whispered conversation between Clara and Julian came to an abrupt halt. They both turned to look at the source of the noise. Shards of glass and champagne covered Ethan's hand. The fragments had dug into his palm, drawing a shocking amount of blood. Julian's face showed concern. He quickly stepped forward. "Mr. Westwood, are you all right?" Then he called to a waiter, "Quick, get a first aid kit." But Ethan seemed to feel no pain. His gaze remained fixed on Clara. Clara, however, merely gave him an indifferent glance. Her eyes rested on his bleeding hand for less than a second before she turned and walked away, as if it had nothing to do with her. Ethan was so angry he could have spat blood. He ignored Julian's concern and didn't wait for the first aid kit. With a curt, "Excuse me, Mr. Croft," he hastily left the ballroom. His left hand was still bleeding, stained with wine and dotted with glass fragments, but he didn't care. He followed the direction Clara had gone. Ethan used his clean right hand to loosen his tie, but the feeling of suffocation didn't go away. He realized then that the choking sensation wasn't from his tie, but from Clara's indifference. Her coldness and disregard infuriated him. Didn't she used to love clinging to him and acting cute? 3 years apart, and she had become a completely different person. Having just returned from abroad, Clara hadn't yet adjusted to the time difference. Earlier, she had whispered to Julian that she wanted to go back to her room to rest. Julian felt he could handle the situation and let her go. Clara herself didn't know if her unease was due to jet lag and the long flight or because of his appearance. When she had helped Julian send the invitation to the Westwood family, Clara had already prepared herself to meet Ethan. Unlike Julian, she knew the Westwood family all too well. She knew that upon receiving the invitation, Elias Westwood would insist that Ethan attend. That meant, after 3 years, she would be seeing him again. Clara hadn't wanted to come. She had even thought of an excuse to give Julian. But then she reconsidered. Since she had chosen to return to Northwood City with Julian, she would have to face Ethan sooner or later. To run away now would seem cowardly, as if she still cared about him. She didn't care. So she had to appear before Ethan looking radiant and successful, a silent declaration that she was doing just fine without him. Chapter 21. Instead of taking the elevator, Clara entered the stairwell, planning to walk slowly up to her hotel room. The ballroom had felt stuffy. Here in the stairwell, a light breeze drifted in through the window, clearing her head a little. Seeing Ethan again hadn't left her as calm as she had appeared. After all, she had once loved him so much. When she saw his hand bleeding, her heart had wavered. But then she remembered. This was the man who had run off to the Special Forces just to avoid her. A small cut like that was nothing to him. Joining the army, the Special Forces, you'd rather risk your life than be loved by me. A man like that wouldn't care about such a minor injury. So Clara didn't even spare him a second glance and walked away. Recalling her final confrontation with Ethan, her chest still felt tight, as if infected by the same heartache from back then. She had worked so hard to move on. She would not make the same mistake again. Just as that thought crossed her mind, she heard the sound of hurried footsteps behind her. She turned around, puzzled, and saw Ethan's cold, hard face. Clara knew that expression. It was the calm before a storm. But she didn't expect that before she could even speak, Ethan would close the distance in 2 strides, scoop her up with one arm, and start carrying her upstairs. Clara let out a cry of surprise. Afraid of falling, she instinctively clung to his shoulders. It all happened so fast. Ethan didn't even break his stride on the stairs, carrying her steadily upward with one arm. 4 years in the Special Forces had not been for nothing. For Ethan, carrying a woman who weighed less than 100 pounds up the stairs with one arm was child's play. Once she recovered from the initial shock, Clara belatedly realized what was happening. "Ethan Westwood, what are you doing?" she struggled, trying to make him put her down. But Ethan's grip was far too strong for her to break free. She was both embarrassed and angry, feeling the heat from his arms seeping through her dress. Feeling her struggle, Ethan didn't loosen his hold. Instead, he held her even tighter. "Ethan Westwood, put me down," Clara said angrily. Ethan didn't slow down. He said coolly, "Clara, not pretending you don't know me anymore?" Clara turned her head away, silent, but kept her arms braced against his shoulders, trying to create as much distance as possible. The way they were positioned was far too close. As far as she could remember, this was the first time she had been in such intimate contact with Ethan since she became an adult, and it made her face burn. Seeing her refusal to talk, Ethan gave a cold laugh and said nothing more, simply quickening his pace. The top floor of this hotel had a presidential suite that was permanently reserved for him. The ballroom was not far from the top floor, and with Ethan's exceptional stamina and speed, he wasn't even out of breath by the time he reached the top with Clara in his arms. When Clara saw him push open the fire escape door and step onto the top floor of the hotel, alarm bells finally started ringing in her head. Chapter 22, what was Ethan bringing her to a hotel room for? There were only 3 presidential suites on this floor. Clara's suite was on the floor below. Furious, she started hitting him. "Put me down, what do you think you're doing?" Ethan remained unmoved. He swiped the key card and opened the door, all in one smooth motion. Once inside, he finally tossed the struggling Clara onto the sofa. The motion made her head spin. A wave of anger washed over her, and she stood up to yell at him, only to see him take off his suit jacket, remove his watch, and begin rolling up the sleeve of his left shirt. The words died in her throat. This gesture of taking off his jacket and rolling up his sleeves, was he going to hit her? She immediately sat back down on the sofa, her courage failing her. After all, this was a man who had been in the special forces. She couldn't win a fight against him. Ethan rolled his left sleeve up to his forearm, then pulled a first aid kit from under the coffee table and placed it in front of Clara. "Clara, dress my wound." Clara froze. So he had forcibly brought her to his room just so she could patch him up. She couldn't help but frown. "Mr. Croft had a waiter get a first aid kit for you. Why didn't you let them treat it?" Ethan sat down beside her. "I'm not used to being so close to other women," he said, matter-of-factly. Clara was speechless. Then, as if remembering something, she said, "Then go home and have your wife do it." She had been away from Northwood City for 3 years. Scarlett and Ethan must have gotten married by now. During those 3 years, Clara had deliberately avoided any news about the Westwood family or Ethan. Even when her parents contacted her, they never mentioned him. So, she genuinely didn't know how things had progressed between him and Scarlett, or if Elias Westwood had finally allowed Scarlett to marry into the family. The Westwood family's doors were not open to just anyone. Ethan frowned. "I'm not married, I don't have a wife." Clara paused, surprised that he and Scarlett weren't married yet. She added snidely, "Then your fiancé, is that better?" Ethan finally realized she was talking about Scarlett. 3 years ago, after they had cleared the air, Scarlett had left Northwood City. She started traveling to remote mountains with a group of friends, contributing to wildlife conservation efforts. She would occasionally send him postcards from her travels. The photos were all of her smiling radiantly, holding various wild animals. It was clear she was doing well. It seemed like everyone had moved on, except for Ethan, who was still trapped in the past. He knew he shouldn't, but he really couldn't let go. It had been so long that when Clara mentioned a fiancé, Ethan honestly didn't immediately know who she was talking about. Then he remembered how Scarlett's presence had upset Clara 3 years ago. She must have misunderstood something again. Chapter 23, so he quickly explained, "Scar and I are just friends. She's the daughter of my commanding officer from the army. I asked her to come back with me 3 years ago to help me put on a show for my grandfather to fend off his matchmaking." At his words, Clara was momentarily stunned. So, Scarlett and Ethan weren't a real couple, but the way Scarlett looked at Ethan was clearly filled with love. And Ethan himself had declared that Scarlett was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. How could there be nothing between them? Seeing her expression, Ethan knew what she was thinking and quickly added, "She did confess her feelings to me after you went abroad, but I honestly didn't know about it before then. To me, she was just a comrade in arms." Clara said nothing. She knew Ethan wasn't one to get close to women. During his 4 years in the Special Forces, he had lived with a group of men and had no contact with other women besides Scarlett. It was plausible that he hadn't noticed Scarlett's feelings for him. Seeing her silence, Ethan opened the first aid kit and handed her tweezers and gauze. "Clara, help me with my wound, please." Ethan had always been domineering and forceful. In all the years she had known him, this was the first time she had heard him use such a tone with her. But she didn't take the tools from him. "So you dragged me to your room so forcefully just to get me to patch you up." Ethan's dark eyes locked onto Clara's lovely face. Her gaze was no longer as cold as before, but it lacked the warmth of the past. It was just calm, like the wind passing without a trace, and it made his heart ache. He had dragged her up to his room because he was jealous of her intimacy with Julian Croft, and because he couldn't stand her coldness and indifference. In the heat of the moment, many images had flashed through his mind, but none that he dared to voice to her now. So he just grunted in agreement. A whirlwind of emotions swept through Clara. She didn't know if she was more angry or more disappointed. "Then couldn't you have been nicer and just asked me for help?" she said, exasperated. In the years when they were still close, it was true that he only ever allowed her to have physical contact with him. But now, his attitude was as hard as a rock. This was no way to ask for a favor. Hearing this, Ethan asked earnestly, "If I had asked you nicely, would you have helped?" Clara fell silent. All right, she wouldn't have. She would have been happy to let him bleed. So she said no more, briskly taking the tools from his hand and roughly grabbing his injured left hand. When her fingers closed around his wrist, Ethan's eyes darkened. Clara used the tweezers to pull out the glass shards embedded in his palm, one by one. Perhaps out of a desire for revenge, her movements were not gentle at all. She even poked his wound several times, but Ethan didn't even flinch. For him, this pain was nothing compared to the pain of losing Clara. Chapter 24, he watched her, almost greedily, as she focused all her attention on his wound. He had personally pushed away the Clara whose eyes used to be filled with only him. Now, he could only resort to such a lowly tactic to make her focus on him again. Even if it was brief and painful, it was like drinking poison to quench a thirst of fleeting, intense satisfaction. In the past, when dressing his wounds, Clara would have been incredibly careful, afraid of hurting him. After all, the sight of his old scars had once made her heart ache for days, but times had changed. Now, Clara just wanted to get it over with and escape this one-on-one situation with him, which made her deeply uncomfortable. She quickly removed the glass shards, then liberally applied iodine to disinfect the wound, and wrapped it in a thick layer of gauze, securing it with medical tape. His wound wasn't actually that deep. It just looked alarming because of its size. Clara quickly finished bandaging his hand, tossed the tools aside, and said, "Done." She stood up to leave, but Ethan wouldn't let her go. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her back onto the soft sofa. Clara felt a strong force tugging her back, and she tumbled into the cushions. Before she could react, Ethan's right hand cupped the back of her neck, and his warm lips silenced her protests. The moment she realized what he was doing, Clara's mind went blank with a loud buzz. Ethan didn't know why he had lost control like this, but when he saw her impatiently bandage his hand and then immediately try to leave his side, a fire of unknown origin ignited within him. Who was she in such a hurry to see? Julian Croft. Ethan's large hand wrapped around the back of her neck, pressing her into the sofa as he kissed her without room for argument. Dominating, forceful, undeniable, his kiss was just like him. Clara was stunned for a moment. When she came to her senses, she desperately tried to push him away, but her resistance only fueled his fervor. Taking advantage of her struggle, Ethan captured her tongue. With a few soft whimpers, Clara melted under his assault. Just as she felt she was about to suffocate, Ethan finally let her go. She gasped for air, her thoughts slowly returning. That was her first kiss, seeing the thin film of moisture in Clara's eyes and the beautiful mole beneath her left eye. Ethan felt an urge to gently stroke her face. But as his hand reached out, she slapped it away, and a stinging slap landed on his cheek. Clara hadn't hit him hard, but it was the first time in his 33 years that Ethan had ever been slapped. Her reaction made his eyes darken, but he had no intention of making excuses. He didn't regret his impulsive action. Seeing that he wasn't moving, Clara tried to kick him, her voice filled with rage. Ethan Westwood, are you crazy? Do you have any idea what you're doing? Ethan grunted, his voice hoarse. I am crazy. I'm going crazy thinking about you. Chapter 25. Clara froze. What was Ethan saying? Thinking about her. During the 4 years he was in the army, she was the only one who had suffered from the agony of missing him. And since his return, he had treated her with nothing but cold indifference. How could he have been thinking about her? So why was he saying such sanctimonious things now? Clara felt as if she had just heard the world's biggest joke. She couldn't help but snort. Ethan Westwood, if I remember correctly, 3 years ago you said you'd rather die than be loved by me. You said we could never be anything more than uncle and niece. So what are you doing now? She shoved him away forcefully. Before he could offer an explanation, she scrambled out of the presidential suite, slamming the door with a thunderous bang. Ethan's hand, reaching out to grab her, caught only air. He looked forlornly at the closed door, finally understanding the despair and heartache Clara had felt 3 years ago. This soul-crushing feeling was 1,000 times worse than any knife or gunshot wound. Clara fled from Ethan's room. Only when she was sure he wasn't following did she slow her pace. Everything that had happened tonight was too dramatic, leaving her head spinning. She needed to get back to her room and get some sleep. But just as she let out a sigh of relief, she ran into Julian, who had just come up from the reception. Julian saw her panicked state, looking back over her shoulder as if a ghost were chasing her, and couldn't help but feel suspicious. Clara, what happened to you? 3 years ago, after arriving abroad, a listless Clara had joined the CEO's office at Croft Corporation, becoming Julian's personal secretary. Because they were both from Northwood City, Julian had taken extra care of her. Coupled with Clara's exceptional talent, Julian had come to value her highly. On her first New Year's Eve abroad, Julian saw that she was alone and invited her to celebrate with his family. Since the Crofts were from Northwood City, they had maintained the tradition of celebrating New Year's Eve even after decades abroad. Clara, who was used to lively celebrations, couldn't bear the thought of spending the holiday alone and accepted his offer. Fortunately, the Croft family was very friendly and took an instant liking to the charming and beautiful young woman. Julian's mother even adopted her as a goddaughter. From then on, outside of work, Clara and Julian treated each other like brother and sister. After 3 years of working closely together, seeing Julian was like seeing a family member. Hearing his question, she fought back the sense of grievance in her heart and shook her head. Big bro Julian, I'm fine, just a little tired. Julian was no fool. How could he not see that something was wrong with her? Not only was her room on the floor below, but she had also left the reception a long time ago. Why hadn't she returned to her room yet? Chapter 26. He suddenly remembered that Ethan Westwood had also left shortly after Clara. And when he had been talking to Ethan earlier, his eyes had constantly been drifting toward her. Clara was beautiful. That was a fact everyone acknowledged. Could it be that Ethan Westwood had made a move on her? It was Julian's first time meeting Ethan, and he didn't know his character. He instinctively assumed he was some kind of lecher. As someone who considered Clara his own sister, the thought made Julian's blood boil. He looked at Clara and noticed that the hem of her dress was wrinkled and her lipstick was smudged. Anyone could see what had just happened. Julian was shocked. He gripped her shoulders, his voice filled with disbelief. Clara, who was it? Who disrespected you? This floor had only 3 presidential suites. He was in one, so the culprit must be in one of the other 2. In a fit of rage, Julian was about to storm the 2 neighboring suites, but was stopped by Clara. Seeing this, Julian understood what had happened. He frowned. Clara, you and Ethan Westwood knew each other before this. Although Julian saw Clara as a sister, out of respect, he had never pried into her family affairs, only knowing that she was from Northwood City. When Clara nodded, Julian realized that all of Ethan's strange behavior must have been related to her. He sighed, took off his suit jacket, and draped it over her shoulders. Come on, I'll walk you to your room. They walked in silence. When they reached her door, she finally spoke. Big bro Julian, I'm the daughter of the Miller Corporation. The Westwoods are old family friends. I didn't mean to hide it from you. Julian raised an eyebrow. So the reason you went abroad 3 years ago was Ethan Westwood? Clara's eyes widened in panic. She hadn't expected him to guess so quickly. Julian smiled and ruffled her hair. All right, don't look at me like that. If you don't want to talk about it now, you can tell me when you're ready. In fact, I should thank Ethan Westwood for sending such a great secretary my way. Clara blinked, looking up at him. Over the years, she had heard plenty of praise. She knew how much of it was mere politeness and how much was flattery. But Julian's compliment seemed genuine, and it warmed her heart. For 4 years in college, Clara had worked tirelessly to be by Ethan's side, only to be met with his question, "You just graduated. Can you handle the job of a CEO's secretary?" Back then, she had been so in love with him. To have her years of hard work questioned by the person she loved had been incredibly painful. But when she went abroad 3 years ago, it was Julian who had accepted her, a fresh college graduate. He had supported her, given her countless affirmations, and even treated her like family. It was Julian's validation that had given Clara her confidence. He was undoubtedly her greatest benefactor. Clara was deeply grateful to Julian, and naturally worked extremely hard for him. And the results showed that Julian hadn't been wrong. Over the past 3 years, Clara had created significant value for him. "Big bro Julian, for these past few years, thank you, really," Clara said, her tone sincere. Chapter 27, Julian smiled. "What's with the thanks between us? Clara, I'm a good judge of character. I've given you so much responsibility over the years because you're worth it. Now, stop overthinking. It's late, get some rest." Clara nodded, handed the jacket back to him, and went into her room. "Good night, big bro Julian." "Good night." Julian's smile vanished the moment Clara closed the door. His face darkened, and he turned back toward the top floor. That hypocrite, Ethan Westwood, dared to do something like that to Clara? When Julian had booked the presidential suite, he had initially wanted the one to his left, thinking the view would be better. But the front desk told him that room was permanently reserved for another VIP guest. He hadn't known who that guest was at the time, but now, Julian was certain. The person in the suite to his left was Ethan Westwood. With a cold expression, Julian strode to the adjacent suite and rang the doorbell. Inside, Ethan, who had been sitting stunned on the sofa, heard the doorbell. His eyes lit up, and he hurried to open the door. Unfortunately, before the word Clara could leave his lips, a fist came flying toward his face. But Ethan was no ordinary man. A former Army captain, an undefeated champion in the Special Forces, his reflexes were faster than anyone's. Ethan sidestepped the punch, swiftly grabbed his attacker's wrist, and slammed him against the wall. He twisted one arm behind his back and pressed his head down with the other. Though he had been out of the military for 3 years, in the face of danger, a primal, bloodthirsty aura immediately emanated from him. Julian, acting as a protective boss and brother, had been furious about what happened to Clara and had intended to land a surprise punch. He never expected Ethan to be so skilled. Before he could even get a clear look at him, he was pinned against the wall, his neck and arm nearly twisted off. The murderous intent radiating from Ethan sent a chill down his spine. Julian was fit. He excelled at skiing, boxing, and other sports. But against Ethan, he felt an insurmountable gap. In an instant, Julian knew that Ethan was a trained fighter. Sensing that Ethan was serious, Julian swallowed his pride and quickly pleaded, it's me, Mr. Westwood, have mercy." Only then did Ethan recognize Julian. He had been so focused on subduing his attacker that he hadn't seen his face. He never expected it to be Julian. Didn't Clara go to find him? What is he doing here? And why did he attack me out of nowhere? I haven't even gotten a chance to punch him yet, and he comes looking for a fight. Ethan gritted his teeth, but finally released his grip on Julian. Chapter 28, Ethan let go of Julian and said with a cold smile, "Mr. Croft, you've certainly given me quite a surprise." Julian, looking embarrassed, straightened his wrinkled suit, then walked to the sofa as if nothing had happened. "Aren't you going to offer me a drink, Mr. Westwood?" Ethan didn't move. Seeing that Julian had no intention of leaving, he finally went to the bar, took out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, and poured 2 full glasses. He handed one to Julian, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "So, all that was just your way of asking for a drink." Julian unbuttoned his suit jacket, sat down, and took a sip. "Excellent wine," he remarked. Ethan watched him with cold eyes, not responding. Julian forced a smile. He knew that if he didn't explain himself, the formidable man before him wouldn't let his guard down. So, he confessed. "My apologies, I was emotional. I wanted to stand up for Clara. I overstepped, Mr. Westwood." Hearing Julian call her so intimately, the image of Clara whispering in his ear flashed in Ethan's mind again. He suppressed his anger, downed his glass of wine, and slammed the glass down on the coffee table with a loud thud. "In what capacity are you standing up for Secretary Miller, Mr. Croft? That doesn't seem like something a boss should do for his subordinate." Julian noticed that Ethan's hand was already bandaged, the white gauze looking almost comical against his tanned skin. He looked at Ethan's dark face, a knowing, meaningful expression crossing his own. "It certainly isn't something a boss should do for his subordinate, because Clara and I are more than just colleagues. But I'd like to ask, what is your relationship with Clara, Mr. Westwood?" Ethan's brow furrowed deeply. What was his relationship with Clara? Uncle and niece? He could never say that. He hadn't seen her as just the niece of a family friend for a long time. Friends? Ethan felt they weren't even that, and lovers was certainly out of the question. So in the end, he really didn't know what to call himself. Julian watched Ethan's ever-changing expression and couldn't help but chuckle. "Can't say, so there's no relationship then?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "And what's the relationship between you two?" he growled. Julian shrugged. "Between us, let's just say it's better than you think." Then, as if remembering something, he frowned. "Mr. Westwood, you should keep your distance from Clara. How could you do something like that to her without her consent? She already ran off to another country because of you 3 years ago. Are you trying to scare her away again?" Ethan rubbed his temples, frustrated. I was impulsive. How is she? Is she very angry?" Julian nodded. "I just walked her back to her room. She didn't seem to be in a good mood." Hearing this, Ethan frowned. "You and Clara aren't a couple?" Julian looked astonished, then said, "Of course not. My mother adopted her as her goddaughter, so she's my godsister. What were you thinking, Mr. Westwood?" Ethan fell silent, so he had completely misjudged the situation. Seeing his expression, Julian seemed to connect the dots. "So you just did that because you were jealous of Clara and me?" he asked, surprised. Chapter 29. Ethan didn't answer, but Julian understood his silence as a confirmation. Julian felt it was all a huge misunderstanding and couldn't help but exclaim, "Everyone knows Clara and I are like brother and sister. Didn't anyone tell you?" Ethan rubbed his forehead, feeling utterly foolish. He really did lose all reason when it came to anything concerning Clara. "I'm sorry, I was too impulsive. I didn't know." No wonder Clara, who normally kept her distance from people, was so comfortable and intimate with Julian. They were like family from the start. No wonder it looked so natural. Now that he understood the situation, Julian asked, "So, what exactly is the relationship between you and Clara?" "She only told me your families are old friends. I don't know anything else. But seeing how she acted tonight, I knew there must be a story." Ethan was never one to be secretive, and he and Julian had, in a way, bonded through their confrontation. Besides, Julian would find out about his history with Clara eventually. So that night, fueled by a little wine, Ethan told him everything. "Our families are old friends. We grew up together in the same neighborhood. Since I was much older and always serious, the other younger kids, out of fear and respect, would call me Uncle Ethan, including Clara." Julian had grown up on the free-spirited West Coast and had seen it all. He immediately guessed the rest of the story. "So, you developed feelings for each other over time, but that title uncle kept you from taking the next step?" Ethan's eyes darkened. "I was the one who didn't dare take that step. She has always been the brave one." Julian understood. "So, Clara confessed to you, but you rejected her for various reasons, and she left the country heartbroken?" Ethan nodded. "And the rest is what you've seen." Julian nodded knowingly but couldn't help asking, "So how are you so good at fighting? You seem to have had training." "The year Clara turned 18, I discovered her secret, that she was in love with me. So, to stop this inappropriate relationship from developing further, I chose to enlist in the army. It was also a way to fulfill a childhood dream of being a soldier." Julian mused, "A good solution in theory, just not very effective in practice." Seeing Ethan glare at him, Julian added, "It's true. If you both loved each other, why waste so many years? If you had really moved on, you wouldn't have gotten so jealous just now from a misunderstanding about me and Clara." Ethan's clasped hands tightened. "You're right," he murmured. "I can't let her go." 3 years ago, when Clara left Northwood City, Ethan had made a vow to himself. If she truly never appeared before him again, he would hide his feelings for the rest of his life. But if she did reappear, and if she still had feelings for him, then she would never escape his grasp. Chapter 30. Back in her hotel room, Clara took off the slightly wrinkled white dress and soaked in the large jacuzzi. As she sank into the hot water, her tense body finally began to relax. She couldn't help but touch her lips. The sensation of Ethan's kiss was still imprinted on her mind. She had looked in the mirror earlier. Ethan had kissed her lips red. No wonder Julian had immediately seen that something was wrong. Clara cursed Ethan in her mind. Barbarian. But why had he kissed her for no reason? First, he carried her off, then he kissed her without any explanation. What did he want? Didn't he hate her? Clara still remembered the words she had overheard between Scarlett and Ethan. Ethan, that niece of yours seems so delicate and frail. Isn't that the type you hate the most? Even though Ethan had just told her that he and Scarlett were just acting, the words she had overheard were real. Ethan clearly didn't like her. Her mind in a turmoil, Clara quickly finished her bath and fell into a deep sleep. Clara's body was truly exhausted. She had been busy with the Croft Corporation's move back to Northwood City, and now, upon her return, she had run into Ethan. The combination of exhaustion and emotional turmoil had taken its toll. She spent the weekend visiting her parents, then went to a spa for a full-body massage, which finally helped her feel rejuvenated. Mr. and Mrs. Miller were emotional seeing their daughter after 3 years. They had so much to say, but in the end, all they could manage was, "It's good to have you back." On Monday morning, Clara arrived early at the new Croft Corporation office in Northwood City. But as soon as she entered the business park, she noticed something was off. This seemed to be the same business park as the Westwood Corporation. The location they had originally chosen wasn't here, was it? The site selection had been handled by other staff in the secretarial office. Although Croft Corporation was successful abroad, the new branch was just starting out, and they needed to be frugal. Property prices in Northwood City were high, especially in the central business district, where rent was astronomical. Although Clara hadn't personally arranged the office location, she had reviewed the budget. Based on Croft Corporation's budget, it was impossible for them to afford such a large space in this central park. Clara walked up to the top-floor office and saw Julian standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring at something outside. She knocked on the office door and walked in. "Mr. Croft, if I recall correctly, the office space we decided on wasn't here, was it?" Seeing her, Julian smiled slightly. "That's right. I changed it at the last minute. The previous location was far from ideal, so I decided to move us here. It will be better for the company's future development." Clara nodded. What he said was true. This was a prime location in Northwood City, and it would only benefit Croft Corporation. But for a newly established branch, it seemed a bit too expensive. Seeing the worry on her face, Julian said, "Secretary Miller, I know what you're worried about. Don't worry. This office building is owned by the Westwood Corporation. I hit it off with Mr. Westwood the other day and got a friendship price from him. This location is actually cheaper than the one we were looking at before." Clara was silent for a moment. Ethan Westwood and Julian Croft, two completely different people, had hit it off. Chapter 31. In fact, what Clara didn't know was that on that night, as their conversation drew to a close, it was Ethan who had brought up the subject. "Has Croft Corporation decided on a location for its Northwood City branch yet?" Julian had nodded and told him the address his team had chosen. Ethan frowned. That location was too far from Westwood Corporation. It would make it inconvenient for him to cultivate his relationship with Clara. So, after a moment of thought, he said, "There's an available space in the Westwood Corporation's business park. If you're not opposed, Mr. Croft, you could move in there. The office equipment in that building is all top of the line and already installed. It should meet Croft Corporation's needs." Julian gave him a meaningful look. He had, of course, considered that prime location and building, but for the newly established Croft Corporation, it was a bit too extravagant, so he had ruled it out. But Julian knew that Ethan's true intentions were not what they seemed. He raised his glass and took a sip, smiling. "Since you're asking for a favor, Mr. Westwood, you should offer me something sweet in return, shouldn't you?" Ethan nodded. "Consider it a favor I owe you, and on a personal note, I'll rent you the space at half the market price." Julian smiled and extended his hand. "Deal. Of course, Julian wasn't going to tell Clara any of this. So, faced with her surprised expression, he just smiled faintly and handed her a folder from his desk. This is the company's latest project. As a newcomer to the Northwood City market, Croft Corporation will face many challenges. So, I negotiated a partnership with Mr. Westwood. We've agreed that for the first year, the Northwood City branch will ride on the coattails of the Westwood Corporation to break into the market. Clara took the contract from Julian with some suspicion. Sure enough, at the bottom, she saw the signatures of both Julian Croft and Ethan Westwood. So they really did hit it off. It had only been a few days, and they had already signed a contract. But at the same time, Clara had to admit that this was a brilliant move by Julian. After all, who wouldn't want to stand on the shoulders of a giant? Before she could praise Julian's efficiency, his next words stopped her cold. You will be in charge of liaising with the Westwood Corporation. You're from Northwood City, and you're my most capable assistant. I can't trust anyone else with this. Besides, since your family and the Westwoods are old friends, you should be somewhat familiar with their company. In short, you are the most suitable person for this job. Clara faltered. Chapter 32, she finally regretted not telling Julian the full, awkward story about her and Ethan. Why had she hidden the fact that she had once worked at Westwood Corporation on her resume? For the past 3 years, although Clara and Julian were like brother and sister in private, they had an unspoken rule: never discuss personal matters during work hours. So, even if she wanted to decline this assignment, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Julian's reasoning was perfectly sound. If she were in his shoes, she would have made the same decision. But now, just the thought of Westwood Corporation, the thought of Ethan, brought back the memory of that kiss. Seeing her lack of response, Julian waved a hand in front of her face. Secretary Miller, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Clara snapped back to reality. I'm fine, Mr. Croft. It's probably just the jet lag. Julian didn't call her out, just smiled. In that case, I'll leave this in your hands. Clara nodded and took the folder from him. She brought several folders related to the project back to her desk and began to review them. As the undisputed leader in Northwood City, Westwood Corporation had access to top-tier resources and projects. After a brief overview, Clara could see that the project had great potential. However, there were a few details she wanted to discuss with their counterparts. Clara found the contact number for the CEO's office at Westwood Corp and scheduled a meeting. Then, she and the marketing manager went to Westwood Corporation. After 3 years, the receptionists at Westwood Corp had all been replaced. The faces were new and unfamiliar to Clara. Clara and Josie Quinn, the marketing manager, stood in the lobby, waiting for the receptionist to confirm their appointment. Josie, awestruck by the magnificent building, whispered to Clara, "Wow, Secretary Miller, Westwood Corporation is even more impressive than I imagined." Clara smiled. Indeed, it's the largest corporation in Northwood City, after all. And it was indeed different from when she had left 3 years ago. Clara and Josie went up to the top floor and met with the Westwood Corporation representative in the conference room. The discussion was lively. After everything was settled and they were about to leave, Clara was stopped by Jenna Riley from the secretarial office. "Oh my God, Clara. Is that really you? I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me." Jenna was one of the few friends Clara had made in the secretarial office at Westwood Corp. They hadn't been in touch for a long time, and seeing each other now was emotional. Josie, sensing the situation, tactfully took the newly drafted partnership plan and headed back to Croft Corporation, while Clara stayed behind to chat with Jenna. "Clara, you have no idea how Mr. Westwood has been working us to the bone since you left 3 years ago." Chapter 33. Jenna and Clara were chatting in a coffee shop near the Westwood Corporation building. Hearing Jenna's complaint, Clara couldn't help but laugh. "We're still so close to the company. Aren't you afraid someone will overhear you talking about your boss like that?" Jenna stuck out her tongue. "I'm just telling the truth. With Mr. Westwood's cold demeanor, working for him is a daily struggle. We're always afraid he'll be in a bad mood and take it out on us." Clara smiled and sipped her coffee, saying nothing. Jenna suddenly seemed to remember something and leaned in conspiratorially. "Clara, let me tell you a secret. Ever since you left 3 years ago, Mr. Westwood's temper has gotten worse and worse. He walks around with a dark face every day, like someone owes him $1 million. Later, An insider told us that his sweetheart had left Northwood City, and that's why he was acting so strangely. Clara's hand, holding the cup, froze. Is that so? Ethan's sweetheart. He had said he and Scarlett were just friends, so who was he mourning for? Clara's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help but think of Ethan's kiss the other day. She had known him for so many years, but that was the first time she had seen him so passionate and domineering. Although Ethan had been drinking that night, his eyes were clear. It didn't seem like a drunken mistake. A flicker of hope ignited in Clara's heart. Could it be that the person who had caused Ethan to act so strangely 3 years ago was her? But she quickly dismissed the absurd thought. She had confessed to him so many times, and he had always been so unmoved. He didn't seem to like her at all. After a brief chat, Clara and Jenna said their goodbyes. Due to the close collaboration between the two companies, Clara found herself visiting Westwood Corporation more and more often. However, she always brought Josie, the marketing manager, with her. But Josie, intimidated by Ethan's powerful aura, didn't dare to enter his office with her, so she would push Clara in alone. Over the past half-month, Clara had been to Westwood Corporation several times, but this was the only time she had seen Ethan. He had been out on all her previous visits. Clara knocked tentatively on his office door. A familiar voice from within said, "Come in." In that instant, Clara felt a sense of déjà vu, as if she had been transported back 3 years to the first time she entered his office as a secretary at Westwood Corporation. Back then, a newly graduated Clara had worked hard to get into the secretarial office, dreaming of becoming Ethan's right-hand woman to help him with his burdens. But it had all come to nothing. Now, 3 years later, as she stepped into his office once again as a secretary, so much had changed between them. Pushing aside the myriad of thoughts, Clara walked into Ethan's office with a professional smile. Chapter 34. When the office door opened, Ethan instinctively looked up. The sight of Clara in her professional suit, walking in, merged with the memory of her from 3 years ago, leaving him momentarily dazed. She now had a mature charm that she hadn't possessed back then. Westwood Corporation had been incredibly busy lately. Ethan had just returned from a business trip the day before. Having not seen her for half a month, his gaze on Clara deepened. Clara placed a folder on his desk, her tone all business. "Mr. Westwood, this is the progress report on the recent collaboration between Croft Corporation and Westwood Corporation. Please take a look." Ethan keenly noticed that she was standing very far away from him. He didn't have to guess why. She was undoubtedly afraid of a repeat of what had happened at the hotel. Does she hate being close to me that much? Ethan couldn't help but frown. But in the end, he said nothing and opened the folder she had handed him. As he read, a look of surprise and admiration flashed in his eyes. 3 years ago, to keep himself from crossing a line, Ethan had never given Clara any substantial work. He had no idea she was so capable. He remembered her words back then. "I didn't slack off for a single moment in my 4 years of college, all so I could be your secretary." A pang of guilt shot through Ethan. She had worked so hard to be by his side, yet he had completely dismissed her efforts for his own selfish reasons. How hurt she must have been. Ethan pushed the folder back toward her. "Everything looks fine. Secretary Miller, your work is outstanding." Clara paused, clearly not expecting a compliment from him. She took the folder, preparing to leave. "If there's nothing else, Mr. Westwood, I'll be going." Ethan interrupted her. "Clara, the things I said and did 3 years ago were never because I didn't believe in your abilities. It was because I love you. And seeing you at work was a distraction." Clara thought she was hearing things. Ethan loves her? Then she remembered what Jenna had told her. Ethan had been melancholic for 3 years because his sweetheart had left Northwood City. And she had left 3 years ago. It all added up. Clara was stunned. Seeing her reaction, Ethan pressed his advantage. "I know you don't believe me, but it's true. Just as you've loved me since you were 15, I have loved you for many, many years. My decision to leave business for the military was indeed because I accidentally discovered your feelings for me, and I wanted to escape. But more importantly, it was because I loved you too, but I didn't dare to cross the line from uncle to something more. So I had to distance myself, hoping to give us both time to cool down. I thought 4 years in the army would make me forget you, and that you would stop loving me. But it turns out, after 4 years, neither of those things changed." Chapter 35. Clara, I have to admit, I'm a coward. I didn't have the courage to defy convention and confess my feelings to you, nor did I dare to accept yours. So I ran away. But every time you were sad or hurt, I saw it, and my pain was even greater than yours. Disbelief filled Clara's eyes. Ethan really loves her, but how is that possible? I brought Scarlett here to act with me, partly to fend off my grandfather's matchmaking, and partly to make you give up on me completely. I'm sorry for hurting you with such a cruel tactic and such cold words. Clara, it was only when I found out you had left Northwood City that I finally understood the despair and heartache you felt back then. I wanted to go find you, but I also forced myself to forget you. But I found that I couldn't. The more I tried to forget, the more your face, your smile, filled my mind. So I made a bet with myself and decided to leave it all to fate. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had a feeling she knew what bet he was talking about. I made a promise to myself. If you truly never appeared before me again, I would let you go completely and never bother you again. But if you did appear again, I would never let you escape my grasp. Because when you appeared before me again, I realized that all my previous reservations were meaningless. Nothing is more terrifying than not being able to be with you. Clara felt unsteady on her feet. Ethan stood up as if to walk toward her, his voice low and bewitching. Clara, 3 years ago you asked me if I would rather die than be loved by you. That's not true. Over the years, I've drunk, I've fought, I've tried everything to get over you, but I couldn't. So this time, I won't run away again. Clara, you are the one person I can never let go of. Can you give me another chance? Seeing him walk toward her, step by step, Clara's mind immediately flashed back to the suffocating feeling of his kiss. She took a step back and said hastily, "Mr. Westwood, if there's nothing else, I'll be going." Without waiting for his reply, Clara fled. Ethan's face was grim as he watched her slip away from him once again. Outside, Josie, who had been waiting, immediately rushed up to her. "Secretary Miller, how did it go? Did Mr. Westwood yell at you? I heard from the people at Westwood Corp that he's super picky and often tears apart the proposals they submit. He didn't give you a hard time, did he? Seriously, and I used to think he was handsome. Turns out he's such a monster of a boss. Hey, Secretary Miller, why is your face so red?" Josie chattered on, but Clara didn't hear a word. She was still reeling from Ethan's confession. She couldn't believe that all those years of his deliberate coldness, which had caused her so much pain, were actually because he loved her. The thought was absurd. It wasn't until she heard Josie's last question that Clara, in a fluster, touched her own face. "Huh, is it?" Chapter 36. Josie nodded, her eyes full of gossip. "Was it because Mr. Westwood is even more handsome up close, so you got shy?" Clara couldn't help but picture Ethan's cold, ascetic face. She never thought she'd see such a gentle and nervous expression on his usually emotionless face, and that she would be the cause of it. It made her head spin. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, no, it was just too hot in there. The AC was too high." Josie didn't say whether she believed her or not, just gave her increasingly red face a meaningful look and said nothing more. After that day's confession in his office, Clara refused to go in alone ever again. She gave Josie 2 choices. Either Josie went in by herself or they went in together. Although Josie loved to tease Clara in private, she was still intimidated when facing Ethan alone. So, for all subsequent work, they submitted their proposals together. This left Ethan feeling helpless. In front of Clara, he could say anything, do anything. But with an outsider present, he had to maintain the image of the cold, aloof Mr. Westwood for the sake of his company. This went on for over a month. Although he saw Clara frequently, they never spoke a word about anything other than work. It was only now that Ethan truly understood the meaning of hoist with his own petard. One day, Ethan signed the final contract, marking the completion of their first project with Croft Corporation. Seeing him put down his pen, an excited Josie stepped forward to take the contract, but Ethan said slowly, "Over the past 2 months, the employees of both Westwood and Croft Corporation have worked hard. Tonight, I will be hosting a celebration party for everyone who participated in this project. Please extend the invitation to everyone at Croft Corporation and to Mr. Croft." It was the first time Josie had heard him speak so many words. Hearing that the big boss was treating them to a party, she immediately agreed. "Of course, Mr. Westwood, I'll make sure everyone gets the message," Ethan smiled, took an invitation from his desk drawer and handed it to Josie, his eyes glancing subtly at Clara. "Tonight at 8, see you there." Chapter 37. The first project was a resounding success, a great start for Croft Corporation in Northwood City. Everyone was eagerly looking forward to the celebration party that night. Ethan had generously covered all the venue and expenses. Julian Croft, as the boss, was not to be outdone. He booked the largest gown rental shop in Northwood City, allowing all the female employees attending the party to choose a dress at his expense. Josie dragged Clara through the 3-story shop, squealing, "Oh my God, Mr. Croft is my hero, this is so generous." Seeing more people arriving, Josie quickly grabbed several dresses. "Secretary Miller, hurry up and choose, all the good ones will be gone soon." But then she looked at Clara's outfit for the day, a simple black professional top with an aligned skirt, which Clara somehow made look incredibly chic. Josie paused, then said with mock despair, "Never mind, you should choose last. People like you who look good in a potato sack should let us mere mortals have a chance with a pretty dress." Josie's comment made Clara laugh. She pushed her into a dressing room. "All right, stop joking around and go try them on." She browsed the racks alone but couldn't find anything she particularly liked. In the end, she chose a simple black gown. Though simple, it had its own design details. It was a long-sleeved, off-the-shoulder dress, and the hem had a tie design that made Clara's already long legs look even more striking. After changing, Clara looked in the mirror, satisfied, and then sat in the waiting area for Josie. While waiting, she touched up her makeup. When Josie finally emerged after much deliberation, she saw Clara, looking effortlessly elegant in just a simple black dress, and felt a pang of defeat. "Clara, are you trying to make the rest of us look bad?" Clara looked at the beautifully dressed Josie and smiled. "You look beautiful too." A celebration party between two corporations was nothing more than drinking, eating, and chatting. Clara wasn't particularly interested in the last two, so she sat quietly, drinking. For the past month, she had thrown herself into her work to numb her mind, but Ethan's confession kept replaying in her head. She was finally beginning to understand why he hadn't given her any real work back then. When the person you love is always around, it's truly distracting. Several male employees from Westwood Corporation came over to toast her, but she politely declined each one. She had deliberately chosen a table away from Julian and Ethan to avoid any drama. If Julian hadn't insisted she come tonight, she wouldn't have. She wasn't ready to see Ethan yet. But Ethan, sitting at the main table, never took his eyes off Clara in the corner. She was drinking glass after glass, as if something was bothering her, which made him frown. Chapter 38. As the party went on, many people were starting to feel the effects of the alcohol, and the atmosphere grew more lively. Even Clara, who had been drinking alone, was starting to feel dizzy and had her head resting on the table. Seeing this, both Julian and Ethan, who had been watching her closely, stood up. Seeing Ethan get up, Julian sat back down. "You should go take care of her. I think she needs you more right now." Ethan gave Julian a questioning look. Julian couldn't help but laugh. "Come on. You rented the office space to Croft Corporation at a low price. You took the initiative to mentor our company. You offered us a partnership, wasn't it all just to see her? So what are you waiting for?" Ethan hesitated. "But I confessed to her over a month ago, and she didn't say a word. She just ran away. She probably doesn't want to see me. Maybe you should go. She sees you as a brother. She won't push you away." Julian was dumbfounded. "I never thought the great Mr. Westwood would be so indecisive when it comes to love. It's a far cry from your usual ruthless efficiency." Ethan didn't respond. Julian patted his shoulder. "If you're so curious about what she's thinking, then go and ask. If you don't ask, you'll never know her true feelings, and you won't know what to do. Let me give you some advice. Never make a decision about a relationship on your own. It's between the two of you, so it should be decided by the two of you. The only reason Clara is angry is because you made a decision for her all those years ago." Ethan's eyes flickered. He said sincerely, "Thank you." "All right, enough with the thanks. You've taken care of her plenty of times over the years. Don't let someone else beat you to it this time." Ethan followed Julian's gaze and saw an unfamiliar face approaching the slumped over Clara. His eyes darkened, and he strode toward her. Clara was dizzy and had decided to rest her head on the table. But after just a few moments, she heard a man's voice buzzing in her ear. "Secretary Miller, Are you okay? Should I help you find a place to rest? Or I can take you home." Her head was already spinning. The chattering male voice felt like a swarm of mosquitoes. Annoyed, Clara lifted her head, about to tell him to go away, when she sensed a tall man standing behind her. The man who had been buzzing in her ear looked terrified and quickly scurried away. Clara turned around, puzzled, and saw the tall figure of Ethan Westwood. She squinted, thinking it was a hallucination. Her head was pounding. All she wanted was to go home and sleep. So Clara stood up, forgetting she was wearing stilettos. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Ethan, who was right beside her, quickly caught her. For some reason, in that moment of being saved, Clara felt a sense of security. She turned around bossily and pointed at Ethan. "You take me home?" Chapter 39. Ethan was taken aback. He realized Clara was truly drunk. Otherwise, she would never ask him to take her home. She had been avoiding him like the plague lately. He looked at her and asked, "Do you even know who I am, asking me to take you home?" Clara didn't answer his question. She just started walking unsteadily toward the door. "Stop talking nonsense." Home, watching her swaying figure, Ethan sighed in resignation, followed her, and swept her up into his arms. The world spun, and Clara's head felt even dizzier. She rested obediently in Ethan's arms, trying to steady herself. And in that moment of stillness, she accidentally fell asleep. By the time Ethan placed her in the passenger seat and fastened her seatbelt, Clara showed no signs of waking up. Ethan felt a wave of helplessness. He had no idea where she lived, and he couldn't possibly take this drunken woman back to the Miller family home. Her parents would surely scold her. So, with no other choice, he drove to his private villa. The guest room was always kept ready with fresh linens, so Ethan carried Clara in and tucked her into bed. As for her dress, he had no female servants, and the cook had already gone home for the night. She would have to make do for one night. But Ethan did manage to find a set of clothes Clara had left at his house years ago, so she would have something to change into in the morning. Though the style was outdated, it was better than wearing a dress she had slept in. However, when Ethan returned to the guest room with the clothes, he found that Clara, who had been sleeping soundly, was now sitting up, looking around in confusion. When she saw him walk in, her eyes finally focused. "I want water." He brought her a glass of warm water. After she finished drinking, she suddenly leaned close to him. "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" Ethan almost laughed out of frustration. He swore to himself that he would never let her drink this much again. Just as he was about to speak, Clara shrieked, "I remember you're the one who confessed to me." Ethan was at a loss. That vague description left him wondering if she actually recognized him. While it was true that he had confessed to her, given her popularity, he was probably not the only one who had done so in the past month. So, Ethan didn't know if she really knew who he was. But soon, Clara gave him his answer. She suddenly grabbed his collar and demanded, "Tell me the truth. Do you like me or do you hate me?" They were so close that Ethan could smell the alcohol on her breath. Even though he knew she was just spouting drunken nonsense, he answered seriously, "I love you. I love you more than anything." "How could I possibly hate you?" Clara was not satisfied. "Liar, I overheard Scarlett say that you hate delicate little girls like me, and you said you were just humoring me." Ethan froze, taking a moment to understand what she was talking about. That conversation with Scarlett, it had been an act for her benefit. After all, as a man who had spent 4 years in the Special Forces, how could he not have heard her footsteps approaching? "I'm sorry. I was lying then to make you give up on me. Whether you're a delicate little girl or a resilient young woman, as long as it's you, I love you." Chapter 40, it was unclear how much of what Ethan said actually registered with Clara. But looking at her unfocused eyes, he suspected she hadn't heard a single word. Forget it. What was the point of reasoning with a drunk person? Some things were better said when she was sober. Ethan gently took her hands, which were still clutching his collar, and coaxed her, "All right, Clara. It's late. You should get some rest." But Clara refused. She held onto his collar stubbornly, clearly having more to say. She leaned in closer, her voice fierce. "You barbarian. You stole my first kiss when I wasn't paying attention, and it made me miserable for ages. This time, you're going to pay." With that, she aimed for his lips, trying to kiss him, but he caught her by the shoulders, stopping her. Clara frowned, clearly annoyed. Ethan's breathing was uneven. He looked into her eyes and asked, "Clara, look at me. Do you really know who I am?" He didn't want to take advantage of her when she wasn't in her right mind. A look of confusion crossed her face. She said impatiently, "Ethan Westwood, I already told you. You're the barbarian who confessed to me. Your Uncle Ethan MMPH?" Her complaint was cut off as his lips captured hers. Clara felt herself being pushed down onto a large, soft bed. The man's fiery kisses landed on her lips and on the small mole beneath her left eye. The familiar sensation washed over her again. She let out a soft moan. She had meant to push him away, but instead, she found herself pulling him closer. The night dissolved into passion. The next morning, Clara was woken by her internal clock, but as she stirred, she realized she was wrapped in a warm embrace. Clara was confused. What happened? But soon, the memories of the previous night came flooding back. She remembered everything. She hadn't actually been blackout drunk. She knew what she was doing and what she had done. The only thing was, she had been so bold and forward last night because she thought she was dreaming. But now, the soreness in her body and the familiar scent of Ethan were undeniable proof that it had not been a dream. She squeezed her eyes shut. However, along with the other memories, she also remembered Ethan's sincere explanations and confession as he faced her drunken ramblings. Perhaps it was that version of Ethan that had moved her, prompting her to do what she had always wanted to do but never dared. Her last reservation had been resolved by Ethan himself last night. Now, Clara could find no reason not to be with him. Just as he had said, he had tried countless ways to forget her, but nothing had worked. And wasn't it the same for her? Since neither of them could let go of this love, they might as well love each other infinitely in the time they had. Clara turned over to face the man who was still asleep beside her. Ethan was a light sleeper. The moment she moved, he woke up. He opened his eyes, nervous, and looked at her. He was afraid he would see disgust or panic on her face, but thankfully, his fears were unfounded. Clara wrapped her arms around his waist. Her voice was still raspy from sleep, but the words she spoke were more beautiful than any love song he had ever heard. "Ethan Westwood, will you marry me? I want to marry you." The weight in Ethan's chest finally lifted. He let out a sigh of relief and hugged her back tightly, as if trying to merge her into his very being. "Yes, let's get married." After all the twists and turns, the person before him was finally the person in his heart.